I met a little fella by the name of Warbook from the Free World League. Loud and very ugly, living his best pug life. Had a dream of being a much warrior pilot, sitting on his grandma's lap and he's fighting composed. The boy was shy away from nothing. That's a jag. Warbook pointed at it. I don't think it's a cat. I think this person might be my dad. That's the battle master. Oh no, excuse me, my hand slipped and destroyed by accident. Warpug destroyed me again. Warpug destroyed another lance. Like he said he would know, he didn't even apologize. Warpug did it to you. Are you little Warpug? Not like the kindest guy. Unsportsmanlike, shoot your legs and Warpug die. An eye for an eye, a man 5'9" and a hateful rise. Shooting DCK players like they shot Cujo. Little pug dog with a burgundy coat. Warpug destroy me again. Warpug destroy me again. Warpug did it to you. Warpug destroyed another lands. Like he said he would, and then laughed in your face at the beginning. Warpug did it to you. And laughed in your face again. He would, and then laughed in your face at the beginning. Warpug did it to you, and laughed in your face again. Like you say he would, and then laughed in your face at the beginning. Warpug did it to you, and laughed in your face again. Like he said he would. No, he didn't even apologize. Warpug did it to you, and laughed in your face again.
Warpugs. Gear Stark, that's probably the best comment I've seen in a good little while. This is apparently Nuke O'Clock. Guys, it is time for us to start on the first Secession War. Now, I will say this. My mouth is in a lot of pain. And I mean, I'm in a lot of pain right now. So, I'm not going to be talking as forcefully as I normally do. You can actually probably see, yeah, this side of my face is kind of swollen a little bit. It hurts. I'm just saying. I'm going to need one, Mad Mergen. I'm going to need one. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal. Today we're starting on the Secession Wars. We have already yeah, it does. Yeah, I don't go to bars, Mad Mergen. I don't go to bars. But the first Secession War, we've already seen the nightmare of what happened when Amaris decided that he knew better than everybody else. This is going to be ugly. Okay, the heaviest nuke in widespread use was the 3 megaton. You guys are talking a lot about the intro for this. So the first statement I noticed about this was you wanted to see the intro for this. So, guys, we're going to check out a little bit of this tonight. I will bring this back whenever I can. I know I'm probably not going to be able to get to it tomorrow night. Probably is going to be a thing. I'm going to be a very busy man tomorrow. But we'll see. Well, I will make an attempt. Warpugs, the first Secession War, you guys have told me that everything I had seen paled in comparison to the absolute brutality, let's get into it. Sven van der Plank, let's go. Age of War, Reunification War, Star League Civil War. Oh, damn.
As every soul alive today knows, humankind has been locked in a death spiral known as the Succession Wars since the final collapse of the Star League.
Looks like it did get out of hand.
Began almost immediately after Alexander Kerensky's exodus over 240 years ago, and there has been less than a decade of quiet since. Even dividing this period into separate conflicts remains a contentious issue among historians, as in many cases, low-level fighting continued, and a peace agreement
2786 through 2862, 21, 9 years of peace, followed by 34 years of war, and then almost 150, over 150 years of war, and then the clans invaded 25.
Was never.
Dude, they didn't have any peace whatsoever. They were at 40k levels of fucking around.
Reached. In its day, what we now call the First was simply known as the Great Succession
Low
War,
intensity?
and the idea that the chain of conflicts would continue for another 2 centuries was inconceivable. The era of the Star League was bookended by 2 of the most devastating calamities humanity had ever known: the Reunification War and the Star League Civil War. Each directly resulted in over 100 million deaths in less than 2 decades. Despite its fabled reputation as a time of unity, by the latter years of the Star League, the inner sphere was poised for self-destruction. Kerensky's defense force was the only thing keeping the proverbial foot on the brake. But with their departure, there was nothing left to keep the great houses in check. The cataclysm that followed would lead to more wartime casualties than humanity's 100 millennia of history combined.
Oh.
By the end of 2784, this outcome had become an inevitability. Throughout the era of the Star League, each individual nation had been carefully kept in check, but with the shocking exodus of the peacekeeping SLDF, those left behind suddenly found themselves on equal footing. The seat of power was vacant, and supremacy over all was attainable. The ruling Cameron line had been exterminated during the Amaris coup, as had the usurper Amaris' offspring, and perhaps the only realistic candidate to replace them had left on a self-imposed exile. The surviving associate members had won their freedom during the brutal Peripheral uprising, the long-suffering territorial states having little interest in continued involvement in the League. This left the 5 council lords of the other member states, none with the authority to claim the position of First Lord outright, but all covetous of the power that came with it. If they wanted to press their claim, they would have to do so through force of arms. Humanity's slow slide back into feudalism was at its high watermark around this point. The fate of trillions within the inner sphere were now controlled by just a handful of ruling dynasties. The 5 heads of state that had disbanded the High Council in 2781, more through fear that their rivals would use it to seize power than a willingness to give it up themselves, were first Prince John Davian of the Federated Sons, Coordinator Minoru Kurita of the Draconis Combine, Captain General Kenyon Manic of the Free Worlds League, Chancellor Barbara Liao of the Capellan Confederation, and Archon Robert Steiner II of the Lyran Commonwealth. Upon the latter's return to his capital of Tharkad, he immediately fell ill and died shortly afterwards. The prevailing rumour at the time being that it was divine retribution for his involvement in the breakup of the Star League. His sister Jennifer took up the Archonship in his stead. These 5 would in time come to be known as the Successor Lords, a title that is still jealously clung to by their descendants to this day. The First Succession War was a true free-for-all with no meaningful alliances to speak of. Nor was there a single event that kicked off the fighting on all fronts simultaneously. As such, natives of each realm often date the conflict based on their own individual histories.
Okay.
However, more often than not, the engagements that took place in the years between Kerensky's departure and the point at which each head of state declared their first lordship are segregated into a period known as the Phony War, and it began within the ruins of the Terran hegemony.
So this is basically World War One. It seems this is basically World War One. It starts off with the Phony War. Nice, I like it.
The nation that had grown up around humanity's birthplace was at one time the mightiest of all the interstellar states. Now it was an irradiated wasteland. The SLDF had done their best to manage the humanitarian crisis as they advanced towards Terra, but many planets were still barely surviving at a subsistence level, while others were completely abandoned. Racing to their aid were the noble Great Houses, flooding the outer worlds with relief efforts, and thereby clandestinely positioning themselves to claim ownership of those systems in the coming years. Some of the threatened planets attempted to band together into new realms, as had happened following the breakup of the Terran Alliance centuries earlier. The core worlds were in the worst state, still protected by the remnants of the Starleague Defense Force, unofficially helmed by Jerome Blake. His branch...
That guy seriously looks like, if the Amish militarized, I'm just saying.
of government, the Department of Communications, was the last vestige of the once colossal Bureau of Starleague Affairs. His efforts made him the face of the recovery, without whom countless millions would have starved. Indeed, among some citizens, he was an almost saintly figure.
The militant wing of the Amish.
Throughout the previous 2 years, the soon-to-be successor states had been claiming worlds along their borders, gradually closing in around Terra. One of the most rapacious was the Free Worlds League. The Captain General had faced a crisis when the League fell, as that institution was what had assured the Maddox family continued dynasty over their realm. With war in the offing, he was able to convince his government to agree to Resolution 288 on December 19, 2784, which would grant him supreme authority for the duration of the crisis, forestalling any talk of a reduction in Maddox power. The seized hegemony worlds were touted as bountiful prizes, made possible only through his actions, their sorry condition kept hidden from the public by his intelligence agency, SAFE.
Hey, Jen, thanks, bud. How's it hang? It's a painful day, bud.
Voracious appetite of the other ruling lords led them to continue to absorb planets into their empires wherever they could. But
Mom, I want to see Princess Leia. We have Princess Leia at home. Princess Leia at home, guys. I'm just saying.
But before they came into conflict with Blake and his SLDF forces, they ran into each other.
Behold, I have a book!
Town was one of the former hegemony worlds seized by the Federated Suns in 2783, and would be one of the ignition points of the Phony War. The occupation force on Town came from 2 regions of Davian space. The Hussars redeployed from Collier in the Fairfax combat region, while the Interceptors transferred across from Ulaanbaatar in the Chesterton ZR.
Hey, Black Wolf. Well, the hospitaler's down in Florida. She's taking care of some family. And, the left side of my face feels like someone hit it with a sledgehammer.
Their place of origin seems an insignificant fact to the Federated Suns High Command, but they were about to discover how dysfunctional their military had become.
Yay!
Spending cuts on transportation, coupled with a lack of action over the past few decades, have resulted in the armed forces of the Federated Suns becoming increasingly provincial, with stronger ties to their home planet than their compatriots elsewhere in the AWFS.
Oh boy.
When the 2 deployed to Town, they took up responsibility for 1 hemisphere each, and had little to no communication or combat drills together. A military coincidence soon brought their lack of cooperation into sharp focus. Arriving in system near simultaneously in February 2785, were a battalion-sized raiding force each from the Capellan Confederation Armed Forces and the Draconis Combine Mustered Soldier.
Ah, yes! I was waiting for Karita to rear its stupid head.
Neither was working with the other, and both had their own individual targets. Majors Wilkins and Donner argued about how to respond to the incoming raiders, their inability to reach a consensus allowing the hostile forces time to make landfall on opposite ends of town virtually unopposed. They swept across the planet, ransacking what military equipment they could reach, while causing widespread destruction and loss of life. 4,000 died in the 2 weeks it took for the Hussars and Interceptors to come together and force the Capellan and Combine forces to withdraw. In the aftermath of the debacle, the First Prince passed the Town Charter, which gave the militia free rein to take what they needed from the AFFS warehouses, though this was of little comfort to the dead.
Yeah.
Elsewhere in the Terran hegemony, the successor states continued to gobble up undefended worlds. The same was true for several jointly administered planets along the borders between other states. The Capellan seizure of Valexa the previous year had caused considerable concern among the field marshals of the Federated Suns, as they had fought a brief border war with the Confederation.
I want to hear bagpipes, but we would have heard of them already because the goddamn Blackwatch ain't here anymore.
Just 2 decades earlier. When they took Andro in 2785, Chief of MI2 Dana Bancroft advised the First Prince that the Capellans were about to launch a campaign against him, a warning that he took to heart. Across the Inner Sphere, the Lyran Commonwealth had the same concerns about the Free Worlds League's efforts to take full control of jointly administered worlds along their border, and they were right to think so. Kenyon Maddock had been moving supplies to the Bolan Thumb in prep.
This guy's face absolutely screams, why yes, I do own I do own a Bugatti, I do own a Ferrari, I do own everything.
Preparation of a major assault for some years now, but Kerensky's exodus had diverted his attention, along with the additional regiments meant to take up positions within the region, to the softer, juicier targets of the Terran hegemony. Steiner had long chafed at the existence of the Bolan salient jutting into their territory. With Kerensky no longer on the map, Lyran High Command began making preparations for what would be known as Operation Elbow Joint.
Okay.
General of the armies Paul Steiner was the mastermind behind the Bolan offensive, with command of the task force given to Lieutenant General Baron Richard Johansson von Eilenberg.
Some jokes write themselves, guys.
A veteran of Operation Almanac. Participating in the attack would be 3 mech and 6 conventional regiments, as well as 7 of the Navy's warships, a trio of Commonwealth-class cruisers, and a quartet of Mako-class corvettes. The defense of the world was orchestrated from within the old SLDF base known as the Overwatch.
Where's Tracer?
Notionally in charge of the 2 mech regiments, 3 League-class destroyers, and single Aegis-class cruiser deployed to Bolan was Colonel Salam Tut. The operation began on March 7th, when the merchant transport Lucian Bell arrived at the system's zenith. 2 squadrons of aerospace fighters exited the vessel and swiftly destroyed every non-Lyran craft at the jump point, while a dropship ferried Marines across to take control of the customs station. The LCS Furillo now appeared, transporting the Sky Rangers invasion troops. The station's occupants desperately tried to contact Bolan, but their message would take hours to arrive yet. Long before then, the remaining 6 warships and 8 regiments of the LCAF arrived at a pirate point, in position to intercept the planet's solar orbit. The space battle began poorly for the overeager Commonwealth Navy. Their corvettes raced ahead to engage the heavier League destroyers. Tiberium took the worst pounding, but was able at least to force the Nerva to withdraw. The ship was failing though, and in an act of desperation, plotted a collision course with the inbound Donegal. The Lyran crew was able to evade the ramming attack, and devastated the Tiberium with a broadside in the process, sending the League vessel tumbling into orbit.
Oh, that's good.
Meanwhile, the other 2 cruisers engaged each other with withering fire. Caledonia suffered heavy damage, but outperformed the much older Manaslu, which was blown apart by a pair of nuclear-armed missiles.
Oh, that's a friendly
reminder. The remaining
reminder.
class destroyers continued to fight for a time, bringing down a pair of Makos, but had to withdraw as the Furillo approached from the jump point. The Lyrans achieved naval supremacy by the 13th. The LCAF began landing the next day. Orbital guns located within the Overwatch made approaching the Sabari island chain all but impossible. This focused the action on the 2 continents of Kashmir and Saket, and the 4 major cities on world. The Arcturan Guards made landfall at Peshawar, quickly eliminating all resistance in the area. While their aerospace fighters swept the surrounding townships for targets, Johansson threatened an imminent attack on Calcutta. Instead, the attack came 2 days later at Quetta, on the opposite side of the planet.
Okay.
Furillo arrived overhead to bombard the spaceport, while the Sky Rangers descended to lay siege to the city below. Meanwhile, the 11th Arcturan Guards were boosted across world to assault the capital city of Mumbai. A day-long bombardment left both cities in ruins. On March 18th, the Lyrans' massed aerospace assets conducted a brutal firebombing campaign at Calcutta, obliterating all resistance within and claiming the lives of some 20,000 civilians.
And so it begins. Well, if Daddy Star League isn't going to go up and pimp slap you, might as well kick the tires and light the fires.
That number is only an estimate, as what happened next makes the true figure unknowable.
Okay.
Colonel Tutt ordered all units to rush the Lyran positions and pin them in place, while he began launch procedures. As the fighting grew fierce, the first nuclear weapons began descending on the 4 major cities of Bolan, annihilating both Freeworlders and Lyrans alike.
Oh.
The Lieutenant General quickly raced his naval assets towards the Overwatch and unleashed his full arsenal on the base below to
Wait a minute. Did the Free Worlds League quite literally say, if I can't have this planet, I'm going to fuck it up in the background? Did they just do that? The Free Worlds League nuked their own damn cities. Oh shit.
stop the launch.
This is quite simply put, if I can't have it, no one's gonna have it.
The Bolan defenders had enough dropships on hand to lift just one of their battalions off-world, their remaining destroyers in orbit perishing in a rearguard action. The Lyran Commonwealth had achieved its first victory of the Succession Wars, but it had come at a heavy cost. Around 45% of their invasion force had been destroyed, and Bolan itself had been devastated. In the aftermath of Operation Elbow Joint, Kenyon Manic officially declared a state of war between the Free Worlds League and Lyran Commonwealth.
What are you gonna say? What are you gonna say, man? It's like, many of you may die, but that is a risk I am willing to take. You farkwad.
He also stated that the conduct of the fighting on Bolan made it clear that neither side had any intention of sticking to the mythical and long-defunct Ares Convention.
I'm sorry, asshole? Like, this guy is a... It's like, okay, hold on. You were losing the ground battle. You dropped nukes on yourself. And then sat there and turned around and said, it's clear they're not going to obey that. You are the ones that violated the Ares condition, and you nuked your own fucking cities to... I'm impressed by the gaslighting involved in this. I am actually impressed. I am concerned about the natural gas supplies because, holy shit, that light is blazing.
Henceforth, the FWLM had free rein to use their full strategic arsenal. He may have regretted that decision later that year, when a pair of Commonwealth-class cruisers arrived at the recently seized hegemony planet Denebola. Colonel DeWitt felt little compunction about ordering orbital strikes to devastate the forces sheltering in the old SLDF base below. Likewise, they quickly dispatched the pair of Vincent-class corvettes in orbit, clearing the path for their own ground troops to make landfall and claim Denebola as their own.
There you go.
On the Commonwealth Spinwood border, the Draconis Combine was looking to make its own gains. They had illicitly hired 20 bandit groups to keep their
And we're still in the Phony War part of this.
neighbours off balance, while they prepared their offensive. Minoru Kurita was planning an all-out assault on one of his two rival successor lords as a mean to demonstrate his own strength, and through it, Kurita's right to rule the Star League, though it was becoming increasingly unclear as to whether such a thing even existed anymore. He would make his decision based on a series of probing attacks, the first of which targeted House Steiner. In August 2785, Bone Norman was raided by a battalion of unmarked mechs, whose primary concern seemed to be causing as much damage as possible. Subsequent attacks by aerospace fighters in the Barcelona and Somerset systems raised the spectre of a resurgent Rimwell's Republic among Lyran High Command. Some speculated that the attacks, which had in truth been carried out by the Combine's Azami people, were Kuritan false flag operations, but Paul Steiner concluded that both aggressors would be just as likely to exploit a weakness along the periphery.
He's a menace!
As such, several regiments were redeployed to the Corwood border. The DCMS now struck, targeting the planet's Gram and Trolloc Prime,
Still the Imperium
overwhelming the
Alcreus.
planetary militia by December 2785. In the case of the latter, some 3,000 civilians caught in the crossfire found refuge within the local HPG station, an act of magnanimity that earned Blake's followers further acclaim. That same month, the Dieron regulars were making another assault on the planet Town, only this time their goal was to capture the planet. Their earlier raid had clued them in to how disorganized the planetary garrison was, and the mechs and 7 supporting infantry and aerospace regiments made short work of them. Reinforcements only arrived in February, by which time it was too late.
Rita?
On Terra, Jerome Blake was busy reinforcing his own tenuous position.
He's arming the horses. Jebediah, get the Atlas.
The rest of the Inner Sphere was closing in on all sides, and it wouldn't be long before they reached humanity's homeworld. In December 2785, one of Blake's close friends from the latter days of the Civil War, Konrad Toyama, became the chief administrator for the SL-Comnet Prime Circuit Station on Dieron. The network had come back online just 3 days after Kerensky's exodus. There was little doubt that he would not be returning, and so in the months that followed, the decision was made to rename the unwieldy and misrepresentative Star League Department of Communications. At Toyama's urging, January 2786 saw the launch of the newly rebranded Comstar.
Yay!
The organization began by introducing the Comstar Letter of Credit, later inheriting the colloquial name C-Bill from the old Star League dollar. The recovery efforts also continued, with one of the largest projects being the Comstar Space Debris Command, which was tasked with clearing the wreckage of many hundreds of warships and jumpships scattered throughout the hegemony. Officially, these hulks were all scrapped, but Blake
Space AT&T has arrived.
concealed the existence of a rare few serviceable vessels. Curiously, no effort was made to reconstruct the orbital mirror over Venus, destroyed in a foolhardy maneuver by Amaris's goons.
Dick.
Over the next 2 centuries, the atmosphere slowly reverted back to its inhospitable state, with barely a few thousand left today inhabiting the former home of 200 million. Elsewhere in the Terran hegemony, several systems were taking matters of defense into their own hands. They could see the old state collapsing, but wished to retain their independence from the larger nations around them. A fledgling alliance was formed in the Lone Star province, key among which were the systems of Dieron and Inglesmond, containing the Stella Trek and LTV aerospace warship facilities.
Okay.
The unification of these planets under Inglesmond came just in time to resist House Kurita's next thrust deep into the Lone Star province. The DCMS entered the region in early 2786, their objective to settle an old score dating back almost 500 years to before the Combine's founding, when
Okay, we're sorry. We're sorry we did not think vote your waifu is best in the universe, assholes.
Dieron split from the rest of the Alliance of Galadin, in protest of Shiro Kurita's double dealing. The former hegemony worlds gave the Kuritans unexpected difficulties, however. The industrial output of these planets allowed them to field advanced battle mechs that at one time would have been exclusive to the SLDF Royal regiments. Furthermore, they had at least 2 warships of their own, with several more under construction.
Okay.
In March, the first prince and his field marshals concluded that they would soon be at war with the Capellan state, and decided that a preemptive strike was preferable. They were still monitoring what appeared to be significant DCMS activity within the Gallatin district on their Corwood flank, but the Department of Military Intelligence suggested that the Curetans were more afraid of Kerensky returning than preparing to attack. Large chunks of the Davian armed forces relocated to the Liao border around the Chesterton worlds. That same month, Kenyon Maddox set about evening the score for Bolan and Denebola.
How can you say you're evening the score when you nuked your own cities? You're an asshole.
Beginning with an attack against Altoona. Nuclear weapons were used to eradicate the surviving battalion of Sky Rangers from Operation Elbow Joint. He followed that up with the takeover of the undefended Hornieres Keep in July. It seemed to the rest of the Inner Sphere that Minoru Kurita had decided which of his immediate foes would become the focus of their own upcoming campaign. In June, the Lyran defences at Skondia were caught completely unawares when a merchant vessel appeared in system and undocked with a sextet of dropships. They burned hard for the planet, whereupon half of them made landfall outside the major northern cities. The LCAF moved to protect the high-priority factories, but the attacking Curetans had a different target in mind. They began instead to open fire on the civilian structures, intent on causing as much death and destruction as possible. The Arcturan guards naturally rushed to their aid, but this left the factories undefended. The second half of the Benjamin regulars now touched down at their actual objectives.
Oh, yes, I would fight the Waffle House warriors with my war pugs. Well, guys, in between Kenyon Merrick deciding that his people should glow green if they're not going to be under his banner, and the Curetans launching a full-on assault on civilian strongholds, well, not even strongholds, just civilians in general. Yeah, here we go. It's starting.
And raided the facilities, while the faster distraction force outpaced the heavier but slower Lyran machines to make it off-world with a minimum of casualties.
Oh,
The
yeah.
same could not be said for the Skondians, 20,000 of whom had been killed. By the midpoint of 2786, all of the border worlds formerly administered by the Star League had been taken over by one nation or another. Some of the Terran administrators were ushered out at gunpoint, others were wooed to lend their services to new masters. Remnants of the SLDF were either hired on or chased out, such as McKinnon's company on Kesai 4, who signed up with the Crucis Lancers after the Draconis Combine tried to eradicate them.
Huh.
The hegemony itself had continued to shrink. 2 of the former provincial capitals were now under foreign occupation. Jerome Blake could see that the so-called Phony War was about to descend into something much worse.
Yeah.
If he had any hope of protecting the core worlds, he would have to act fast. He outlined his plan to the Comstar First Circuit, the HPG administrators for each of the Prime Circuit stations. Preparations began for Operation Silver Shield. Trusted mercenary groups formed from ex-SLDF soldiers began relocating to Earth, while Blake himself departed to meet each of the successor lords. He sought recognition of Comstar's neutral status and assurances that the HPGs would not be targeted during any upcoming conflict. In a rimward direction, the Capellan Confederation moved to shore up their borders by sending the Zion Lancers to secure their homeworld after it had been taken by opportunistic Marek forces.
Okay.
They also cleared a path to the planet Northwind, home of the famous Northwind Highlanders, longtime mercenary auxiliaries for the Capellans. The Federated Sons likewise moved to take the home system of their Deneb-like cavalry.
Okay.
In December, the DCMS finally achieved their goal of reclaiming Dieron after its secession 475 years earlier. With the system under Draconis Combine rule, the Dieron regulars had at last secured a home for themselves, and a new military district was established. With this victory, Coordinator Minoru Kurita felt bold enough to make the announcement that each of the successor states were considering. He proclaimed himself First Lord of the Star League, and declared war on any who would challenge him. The succession wars had begun.
All right, here we go. I wouldn't doubt it, DJ. I would not doubt it at all.
When Minoru Kurita proclaimed himself First Lord in December 2786, it kicked off the largest conflict in human history. With so many players involved and such high stakes, it is worth dedicating a chapter of our story to covering the participants in detail.
Okay.
Much of this information remains relevant to the present day 3025, so laying out this foundational knowledge now will allow us to skip past it when covering later events.
All right.
Chiefly, this will be an in-depth look at the political landscape of the Inner Sphere, focusing on the successor states in the year 2787, the size of their realm, their internal structure, industrial might, and the reputation of their intelligence agencies, as well as some comparisons between them. We'll also look in brief at some of the minor powers scattered across the Inner Sphere and Periphery, as well as the remnants of the once mighty Star League and Amaris Empire. The following chapter will delve into the size and composition of their armies and navies. As mentioned, Minoru Kurita was the first to declare himself First Lord from his chrysanthemum throne on Luthien, so it makes sense to begin our overview with the Draconis Combine. The Coordinator of Worlds exercised an unparalleled level of control over their nation, leading a stratocracy of military leaders. Minor noble houses held considerably less sway in the Combine than in their neighbouring states. The Kuritan family claimed dominion over the third largest territory within the Inner Sphere, containing 404 planets, fewer than all but one of the rival Great Houses. The realm was divided into 5 military districts, each ruled by a warlord and internally subdivided into several prefectures. Of particular note was the warlord of the Galadon district, the Coordinator's son Jinjiro. Kuritan appointed governors often ran the day-to-day operations of the 5 government districts, but could be overruled on the whims of their warlord superiors. In the Draconis Combine, the military reigned supreme over all else.
Makes sense.
During the course of the war, the Combine would restructure itself as the Dieron military district was formed out of the captured hegemony worlds and the Benjamin prefectures closest to Terra. Chancellor Barbara Liao followed the Coordinator's pronouncement by declaring later that December that it was in fact she who was the new First Lord.
Okay.
House Liao already wielded near complete autocratic control over the lives of every citizen within the Capellan Confederation. However, they were kept in check by a small council known as the Prefectorate.
They're also kept in the check by the fact they can't look over each other's shoulders without seeing the knives coming in.
And also maintained the facade of consulting the nobility through the House of Scions. The Confederation was notable for its very high density of colonized systems. The Liao family may have held the smallest territory of any great house, but they had fully exploited the systems within that area to claim control over 432 planets. The Capellan Confederation was made up of 7 commonalities, each a former nation that had banded together to fight off the predations of their larger neighbours back in the 24th century. The Jade Palace on Cyan gave that province overall supremacy, but the Capella, Sarna, St. Ives, and
St. Ives, they make wonderful bat products.
Tikhonov commonalities were all historic members. The Andurian and Chesterton commonalities were disputed systems with their neighbours, and would become some of the most heavily contested worlds of the war. On New Year's Eve, Archon Jennifer Steiner called Kurita's bluff, and declared herself First Lord.
Oh, great!
It was more out of mockery than a personal conviction, as Jennifer had long since accepted that the Star League was no more. Unlike the other realms, House Steiner had not ruled from the outset, instead taking power in the early years of the Age of War, after moving the capital of the Lyran Commonwealth to their homeworld of Tharkad, constructing the Triad as the centre for all branches of government.
So she was basically just taking the piss out of Kurita because he was being a jackass. I think I like her.
Since then, they had consolidated power within the family as much as possible, but the Estates General still held a moderate degree of influence. The Steiner realm was the largest single territory within the Inner Sphere, containing 476 colonized planets. The Lyran Commonwealth had an antagonistic relationship with their Spinward neighbour going back centuries. It was the threat of Curitan expansion that had actually drove the Protectorate of Donegal, Federation of Sky and Tamar Pact to unify. Each of the former states is subdivided into 4 provinces or shires, with the 3 capitals located within the District of Donegal, Isle of Skye and Tamar domains. The noble houses of Kelsois and Lestrade.
The Shire? Okay. The Lyran Commonwealth is also now known as the German Hobbits.
Rule the Spinward regions from Tamar and Skye. Viola Steiner Dinason's Day of Rage during the Reunification War would always cast a shadow over relations between the families, but the long years of prosperity had repaired most of the damage. Captain General Kenyon Maddock followed his neighbour's example by declaring himself First Lord in January 2787.
I'm actually surprised he didn't do it. I'm actually really surprised he didn't do it, okay?
The Free Worlds League was a loose conglomeration of independent worlds, several among which had unified into one of many provinces. Representatives met within the Parliament on Atreus to elect a council to handle matters of state. While the ministers themselves were often unelected nobles within their own systems, this still gave the League a notable democratic bent in comparison to its rivals. However, all this was thrown into jeopardy with the passing of Resolution 288. The position of Captain General was envisioned as only being used in times of great crisis to ensure the nation could defend itself. But now, as long as House Marek continued to claim that said crisis existed, they could rule as a virtual dictator.
Oh, okay.
Territorially, Kenyon's realm was larger only than the Capellan Confederation, but they were sparsely populated by comparison, controlling just 338 planets. The 3 major powers within the Free Worlds League were the Grand Duchy of Orient, the Principality of Regulus, and the Marek Commonwealth, within which was the nation's capital. They were ruled by the noble houses Allison, Cameron Jones, and Marek. Additionally, the Stuart Commonalty of House Stuart and Duchy of Andurian of House Humphreys also held a reasonable amount of power.
Okay.
Furthermore, many smaller provinces existed, including the Abbey District, Duchies of Graham Marek, Kalidasa and Orloff, Principality of Gibson, Regulum Free States, and Rim Commonalty. Lastly, there was the Bowl and Thumb, a pseudo-province jutting into the Lyran Commonwealth. The Salient was not a formally recognised province, despite raising a brigade from its own populace.
Okay.
In practice, the region was run by the League Central Coordination and Command Group.
LCCG, hooray.
Last to throw his hat into the ring was First Prince John Davian. The others had made it abundantly clear that they would not support him as First Lord, despite his position as Regent. Only Minoru Kurita could have corroborated his appointment, as he had received a missive from Richard Cameron on the matter, though for obvious reasons he chose not to speak up.
Hey Seth, you have a nice night, bud, alright?
Of all the
And thank you,
rulers,
bud.
the First Prince held the least amount of power within their respective realm, at least as long as Resolution 288 held. Their actions in many areas could be impeded or even countermanded by the High Council, an authority which the Davians had continually chipped away at over the centuries. The Federated Suns, territorially second only to the Lyran Commonwealth and counting the greatest number of colonized planets within its borders at 538, relied heavily on the system of feudalism to exercise control over such a large state.
Great.
Barons holding small regions of land paid homage to the counts that ruled the planets, who in turn swore fealty to the dukes who controlled whole regions of space, all of whom served the First Prince.
Ah, so Space France, let's go?
The Federated Suns was not an alliance of smaller nations. It grew from the Crucis Pact signed on New Avalon during the
Never mind, HRE.
24th century, slowly absorbing independent worlds and microstates as it went. Following the Davian Civil War, the internal borders were redrawn and the realms divided into 3 marches, the Draconis and Capellan facing their respective neighbours, and the Crucis March at the centre. The marches were split into 2 or 3 operational areas, and then subdivided into combat regions. Control of the Draconis March had rested with House Sandoval and Robinson for over 2 centuries, while the powerful Hasek family of New Syrtis had de facto command of the Capellan border.
Hey Casey.
The Terran hegemony may have survived the Amaris Empire in body, but not in spirit. The remains of the Cameron realm were in poor shape, now amounting to just 72 systems. President of the Terran Congress and de facto Director General was Jens Penera. At well over 100 years old, he struggled to lead a nation in ruins, lacking even the most basic support to get things done.
Yeah, and you know, he's not going to step down, because why would you step down if you weren't able to lead? I mean, we don't see that every day, don't we?
Their authority was further undermined by the growing influence of Comstar on Earth. The provincial capitals of Terra Firma and Tirfing had been seized by the Capellan Confederation and Free Worlds League, forcing the administrative centres to relocate to Brownsville and New Dallas. Lone Star Province was theoretically run from its namesake system, but the planet was still reeling from the fallout of the Starleague Civil War. Several worlds had broken off to form their own proto-state around Inglesmond. Lockdale Province, like the other three outer regions, had lost half its territory to its expansionist neighbours. Even the hegemony core was being nibbled at by the Lyran Commonwealth. The military-industrial complex within the Inner Sphere had been steadily ramping up for decades, and soon each nation would be funneling all available resources into wartime production. While certain regions were particularly known for being heavily industrialized, such as the Federation of Sky and Tikhonov commonality, the major arms factories were often situated away from these vulnerable border regions, deeper into secure territory. This was just as well, as they would soon become primary objectives for raids once the war commenced.
Hooray!
Many of these key installations were located at national or regional capitals, which were themselves priority targets for capture or destruction. The Draconis Combine had most of its major factory worlds located within the Pesht military district, accounting for almost as many as the others combined. Chief among these was the planet sometimes known as Black Luthien, so named for the polluted grey sky that permanently hangs above the capital's massive industrial complexes.
And we have the first Hive world in Battletech. I knew this was a precursor to 40k.
The Combine was notably lagging behind their rivals, producing approximately 20% less than the standard of the day. Liao's industrial might was relatively decentralized. The 5 older Capellan commonalities maintained a rough balance between themselves, while the fractured Andurian had less to offer and the Chesterton worlds virtually nothing. The Confederation's industrial capital was the planet Tikhonov, the sole planet to have resisted Amaris's early aggression during the Starleague Civil War.
That is an unfortunate place. Massively unfortunate. Holy crap.
Within the Lyran Commonwealth,
that is unbelievably unfortunate. Imagine having your industrial power base on the fucking border.
The expansive Protectorate of Donegal produced more than half of Steiner's weapons, despite most of the province being undeveloped in comparison to their Spinwood compatriots. The key industrial site was located on Hesperus II, the largest manufacturer of battle mechs in existence. Overall production for the realm was more than 30% greater than their nearest rivals, making them a serious threat in a protracted war. In a realm known for bickering and political infighting, House Manic was wise to keep most of their weapons production within their own commonwealth. A few notable League independents also made significant contributions equivalent to some of the much larger provinces. The largest factories were on Irian. This planet generated so much wealth that in the modern era it now exists as a one-world province of its own, still matching even the Grand Duchy of Orient single-handedly. Within the Federated Suns, House Hassett could produce nearly 3 times House Sandoval, but could only manage half of what came out of the much larger Crucis March. New Avalon housed the largest factories, matching Luthien in terms of weapons manufacturing. Overall production for the realm was equal to the Capellans and Freewelders. Lastly, the battered Terran hegemony had surviving weapons plants on only New Earth and Terra itself. Despite the 3-year battle that had raged across its surface, enough factories had survived the carnage at the end of the Starleague Civil War to match the Davian and Kirita capitals for most heavily industrialized planets in human space. just as critical to the war effort as these ground factories.
Okay, so warship naval yards are denoted by planetary rings. So, warship yard, warship yard, warship yard, another there. So all those are prime targets. All of these are prime targets for any campaign. My God. If I was the free world's... Oh, Lord.
With a rare few naval yards capable of constructing and servicing warships.
Which I think is good at
Terran
showing.
hegemony
I
had
think
been
it's
the
good.
center of warship production in the inner sphere. Many designs in service with the successor state navies originated in the hegemony, making its capture essential to maintain.
Keep the Caretans away from Nanking. I repeat, keep the Caretans away from Nanking. Because no matter what I hear about in the next, I don't know how many hours we're going to be on this, it will be nothing compared to what the Caretans would do to Nanking.
Maintaining their fleets. Even in its fractured state, it still operated 14 military-grade shipyards, more than any great house. 8 of the Draconis Combine's 10 facilities were in the Pest military district. The Capellans had 1 fewer in total, again spread across their realm. Skye and Donegal were nearly matched, with a 10th Lyran shipyard in the Tamar Pact, and the Free Worlds League had 11, with a notable concentration within the small Principality of Gibson. The Federated Suns had just 9, again based mostly in the Crucis Pact. However, a third of their theoretical output came from the Galax Megaplex, a massive new naval yard constructed by Boeing International after the fall of the Star League.
Be very careful about Boeing.
Problematically, they refused to begin production until they received orders from head office on Terra. This left House Davian with only 6 operating facilities. Throughout the Succession Wars, the success or failure of a plan often rested on the abilities of a nation's intelligence agency. The most ruthless and pervasive is surely the internal security force of the Draconis Combine. They answered directly to the Coordinator, meaning even the most powerful warlords had to fear the ISF agents doubtless hidden within their staff or household. A second group within the Combine was the Order of the Five Pillars. Officially tasked with simply maintaining the honour of House Kurita, they operated their own network of spies all the same. Perhaps only one was more feared than the ISF, and that was the Mashkarovka of the Capellan state. They had a history of using terror tactics to achieve their goals. The Lyran Intelligence Corps employed some of the best minds within the Commonwealth. In contrast to their military, the LIC was extremely well run and effective. In a realm not known for fanaticism, the Intelligence Corps nevertheless employed some of the most die-hard loyalists. The newest intelligence agency belonged to the Free Worlds League. SAFE was founded after its predecessor, the National Intelligence Agency, was disbanded in the wake of a financial scandal. Their involvement in the Matic Civil War had tarnished their name, and often they struggled to achieve the same results as their neighbours. The Federated Suns was without a civilian agency, instead relying solely on the Armed Forces Department of Military Intelligence. Unfortunately, internal factionalism and elitism on the part of the military meant that crucial information often wasn't shared with others who might have benefited from it. The Periphery states would barely participate in the First Succession War. They wisely distanced themselves from the conflagration, but were not without difficulties of their own. Their hard-won independence had come with a slew of problems that the battered realms, still struggling to rebuild after their freedom war, had trouble dealing with. Protector Nicoletta Calderon had achieved her life ambition in gaining independence for the Taurian Concordat. Her family's holdings had grown to include 77 planets, stretched along the Federated Sun's rimward border. The realm was divided into the Brinton, Damasus, Hades, and Perdition unions, but the nation's heart remained within the fortified Flanagan's Nebula and the planet Taurus within. Most of the Taurians' manufacturing, both weapons factories and their 3 warship facilities, took place in the Hades and Perdition unions. Equivalent to less than 30% of the Inner Sphere average, they nonetheless managed to outperform what was left of the Terran hegemony. Magistrix Janina Centrella still sat on the throne of Canopus, ruler of some 65 planets. The magistracy had managed to escape the worst of the carnage during the reunification war that brought them into the Star League, but winning their independence had cost the realm dearly. First hit had been the Canopus district, but the Ballad and Luxem provinces had seen fierce fighting in the second year. House Centrella had only two major manufacturing worlds, at Canopus and Dunianshire. This accounted for not even a quarter of the Taurian output. Those planets also maintained naval yards in orbit. The 137 planets of the Outworlds Alliance were notionally helmed by President David Avalar from Alpharats, but the naturally isolationist citizens of the Outworlds only paid lip service to their supposed ruler. Alongside the capital province were the Balagora, Blomstein, Cerberus, Omferwacht, and Remora provinces, as well as the Traders' Domain. Just as the others were, the Outworlds was suffering from the fallout of the Periphery uprising. The nation could just about match the magistracy for arms production, but had just a single major shipyard, dangerously close to their two aggressive neighbours.
Why do I feel like the Outworlds Alliance is about to take a pounding? I mean, it honestly, it should, to be honest with you, considering how low their production is. I'm just saying. They got a lot of territory and not a lot to protect it.
The Rimworld's Republic had been one of the casualties of Alexander Kerensky's inexorable advance during the Star League Civil War. The old Omanist government had been removed at gunpoint, and the fragile democracy that replaced it was swept aside during Operation Ulmerich by the Lyran Commonwealth,
Hooray.
who went on to seize most of the key industrial worlds for themselves. Without that foundation, the realm had collapsed. Within this lawless region, various pirate groups and petty kings staked their claim to the ruins. The Barony of Strang and Belt Pirates of Star's End were two such groups, based around systems containing rare periphery naval yards. The Black Warriors, the mercenaries that had played an instrumental part in the liberation of the Terran hegemony through their training efforts at Camp Amber, had been abandoned by the SLDF.
Of course.
When some Lyran refugees arrived in 2785, together they formed the Cercinus Federation.
Any government with an icon like that is definitely trustworthy.
Outwardly, they put on the appearances of a periphery independent, but in truth, they were bandits for hire. Largest and oldest of these pirate realms were the Tortuga Dominions, a loose collection of outlaw groups situated on the far side of the Inner Sphere. Out of the ashes of the Republic rose two realms that promised some better hope of unifying and rebuilding the region. First came the Oberon Confederation in 2775, and then the Finnmark Free Republic 4 years later.
Holy shit, it's the Finns. Prepare yourself.
Latter even capable of warship production. In a rimward direction were two more periphery microstates, the Illyrian Palatinate and Lothian League. In the deep periphery was one other minor compact, known as the Yarnfolk.
Yarnfolk.
They had very few dealings with the Star League, and are so remote they have not been heard from in the 250 years since its fall.
Oh.
This was the state of the Inner Sphere in 2787. The successor states girding for war couldn't have known it, but this was to be the apex of their civilization. Would any of the successor lords have reconsidered if they knew how little they stood to gain, and how much their own realms were about to suffer?
Karita, no. Free Worlds League, probably. Capellans, probably not. The Steiners, who knows. The Taurians, get the fuck off my lawn. The Canopus, we're just cat people here. Davion would have backed off, yeah. Lunatic! Damn, dude! Oh my god! Dude, I much appreciate it. I will. I'll take the wife when she gets back. She comes back in 3 weeks. She's out right now. But much appreciated, my guy. Thank you so much. Oh wow. yeah, Rhina, no kidding. No kidding. I gotta get this taken care of first. But Lunatic, I'm definitely gonna do that, man. Appreciate it. I very much appreciate it. Dude, I really, really do appreciate it. Oh my god. Oh god, it's still going. This is about to get horrific. This is about to get very fucking bad. Lunatic, thank you very much, man. I very much appreciate it.
When Alexander Kerensky departed for uncharted space in November 2784, he did so with a force of well over 2 million soldiers. Yet even this was just a fraction of the total number of individuals who had fought in the Stalag Civil War. If one includes the Peripheral uprising, a total of around 5,500 regiments had participated across both sides. While no individual successor state could come close to matching the mighty Stalag Defense Force, together they would far surpass it. The First Succession War would see more than 7,000 success.
I'm just gonna say it, guys. I much appreciate, like, you guys have no idea what you guys have done, like, for me and my family. I much appreciate it. It's a constant thing for me that I don't know how things would be right now if I wasn't doing this. And Lunatic and everybody else, anybody that does anything, just by sitting here watching this with me, you know, I really massively appreciate each and every one of you. I am very proud of the community that I've put together. I'm very happy with the community I have right now. And I just hope we get so much more, you know, as far as just people with interests, man, people with interests, and learning about cool stuff. Okay, just let's go. Thank you guys so much.
Were at their peak, each commanding between 12 and 1,700 regiments apiece. Never again would they reach the heights that they did in 2787. More than 2 centuries of war have steadily reduced those numbers. The high watermark for warships had passed along with the Stalag Navy. Only 1,000 such vessels were left in the inner sphere, compared to the more than 3,000 Amaris and Kerensky had hurled at each other. From the moment the Stalag Accords were ratified in 2571, the Great Houses were constrained on how much of their resources could be funneled into the military. Directive 30, passed in 2650, further reduced the size of the standing armies. Unfortunately, the good years were already coming to a close by that point, and with the commencement of several hidden wars and civil unrest, each member state of the Stalag sought ways to circumvent the restrictions. When the Council Edict of 2650 was revoked a century later following the assassination of Simon Cameron, the size of the House militaries grew rapidly.
71.
In truth, most of that early expansion was nothing more than officially acknowledging the reality that each had vast numbers of demobilized troops that could be called upon to fight. Between 2750 and the beginning of the Peripheral uprising 15 years later, the member state militaries saw an increase in size of between 55 and 120%. Throughout the Stalag Civil War, every nation had made vast profits selling their military hardware to the desperate SLDF. Naturally, growth tapered off during this period, but the realms could see the growing importance of maintaining fleets of warships. The next 15 years saw them double the size of their navies by returning to service their many mothballed ships, as well as launching dozens of new vessels.
Oh boy.
With Amaris defeated, they pumped
no barons, I hope.
Up production again for their own armies, but the looming threat of an irate Kerensky kept any from being as aggressive as they had during the years of Richard Cameron. But almost 200 more warships entered service in the 5 years that followed. Even before the Exodus, the Great Houses had made efforts to court surviving SLDF and Imperial forces in the hopes that they would switch sides. It was one of the leading reasons why Kerensky ultimately decided to lead his army into the deep periphery, to keep it out of the reach of the grasping successor lords. Around 78% of the defense force followed him, but that still left dozens of regiments lingering within the ruins of the Stalag. Most of those left behind either entered service with their planetary militia or swore loyalty to Jerome Blake and Comstar, something which Blake did his best to cover up. But many others were swayed by one of the lucrative offers made by the successor states. Several turned mercenary and hired themselves out to the highest bidder. Some sat idle but ready, waiting to see if their comrades would return from deep space. While the passing of the Star League Defense Force marked the end of such large formations as divisions, corps, and armies, the successor states continued to use the same SLDF structure, where a lance was 4 battle mechs, a company 3 lances, a battalion 3 companies, and a regiment 3 battalions. Regiments of shared lineage or loyalty belonged to less defined brigades. At the onset of the First Succession War, these units were at optimum readiness levels, fully equipped with all the supplies and material they could wish for. It would be the last time this was ever the case. House Kurita's military was the Draconis Combine Mustered Soldiery. Like all of the warring parties, the DCMS in 2787 was at its apex, unmatched in size before or since. 146 battle mech regiments were available to Minori Kurita and his warlords, supported by almost 1,400 conventional regiments of infantry, armour, artillery, and aerospace fighters.
Okay.
At the top step of the DCMS were the 5 Sword of Light regiments, named for one of the 5 pillars of Kuritan society, those being ivory, steel, jade, gold, and teak. They were the personal command of the coordinator and tasked only with the most crucial objectives. Unsurprisingly, they were the best equipped forces in the Combine, each regiment fielding 4 battalions of cracked mech warriors, plus 2 wings of aerospace support. Beneath them were the military district units, representing Benjamin, Dieron, Galadin, Pesht, and Razelhaig. The Galadin regulars were the best equipped of these, chiefly because of Jinjiro Kurita, but also because the ancestral home of House Kurita at New Samarkand was within their borders.
Okay.
Smaller units included the Arkab Legion, founded and operated by the semi-autonomous Azami people, and the Proserpina Hussars, a well-trained and respected free-floating unit deployed across the realm as needed. The Sunzang Academy was the Combine's premier military school, supplying the mustered
Suzong. Does anybody else see what they did there besides me? Dude! Dude! Christian, thank you, man. Much appreciated. Love your content. Welcome to Battletech. Thanks for the Warhammer content. Even if I don't like Warhammer, this is the best BT gets, but it's fun. This is the worst BT gets, but it's fun. Dude, I have loved this. I have loved Battletech since I've gotten into this. I was always on the periphery, pardon the pun there, of Battletech, but now I've kind of dived into it. I have been enjoying this the entire time. This has been a whole thing. This has been awesome. This has been awesome. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Kirsten. Kirsten. Christian. Oh my God, I will speak. Sorry, guys, my face is killing me. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. Thank you so much.
The soldiery with a dozen regiments of its own graduates, green but fanatically loyal.
Oh, great.
DCMS organizational doctrine at the time grouped each mech regiment into brigades alongside varying amounts of conventional forces, with the exception of the Sword of Light and Sunzang Academy cadre.
Yeah, man.
Barbara Liao intended to...
And see, that's the point of this. That's the point of this. People who, that's the great thing about this stream. There are people that really know the lore and are just enjoying seeing somebody learn about it and being around people. And there are people that know nothing about the lore. And that's the best part about this community. We're spread out over a whole bunch of stuff, and there's so many interests that everyone has. It's just great to mix and match and see how ridiculous things are and how we all don't want to wind up in the Imperium.
Used the Capellan Confederation armed forces to press her claim to the First Lordship. The CCAF, as had been the case throughout their history, was the smallest of the 5 successor state militaries, operating 118 battle mech
Christian,
regiments
thank you. Lunatic,
and another
thank you so
1,100
much.
conventional units. Of particular note was the Confederation's doctrinal reliance on artillery, averaging around twice as many battalions compared to the other successor states.
Okay, artillery, go.
The Chancellor is the highest authority within the armed forces, advised by the Strategios. The CCAF is less homogeneous in its structure, with several of the brigades broken into smaller subcommands or grouping dissimilar regiments. The Capellan Hussars were the best the state could field, but the individual units had a diverse range of backgrounds, many dating back to the old proto-states. Cyan's Red Lancers are the Chancellor's personal bodyguard, while Capella's Prefectorate Guard do the same for the ruling prefects. The Ares Titans are Capella's other elite unit. The Chesterton Guardians belong to their namesake commonality, Griff's Hussars St. Ives, and Blandford's Grenadiers Tikhonov. Two of the Confederation's linchpin worlds also warrant a permanent garrison in the form of the Marshals of Tikhonov and Andurian Heavy Guard. To review the standardized brigades next, the Andurian Hussars, Capellan Chargers, Cyan Dragoons, and Tikhonov Lancers were maintained by their respective commonalities.
I had been wondering what these things were like, because I had seen so many times like different unit names and things like that. It's nice to know where they come from now. I didn't even think they were based out of the smaller territorial areas inside.
The former Sana supremacy had a rebellious history, their old ignominious Sana sabres since replaced by the Liao Lancers. The Liao Guards were the personal brigade of the ruling family, while the Confederation Reserve Cavalry acted as the last line of defense. The Chesterton Regulars were as fractured as their home province. The Chesterton Cavalry and Cuirassiers are the only survivors of the old Chesterton Trading League Army.
71, me too.
The Ariana Fusiliers are another unit dating to before the Age of War, while the Ariana Grenadiers are a more recent addition. Shadrach's Shadowhawks and Tristram's Avengers complete the regulars. The St. Ives Armoured Cavalry is even more decentralised. The St. Ives Lancers are the lead unit, while the Chevaux Légers operate further across the Confederation. The Capellan Cuirassiers are one of the commonality's elite regiments, but are recruited from across the realm. The Centauri Guards are an amalgamation of several older noble house units, while the Teng Hussars represent another, but have remained a separate entity. The Redfield Renegades and Sharp Rifles have been raised by the respective...
Wait a minute, what was that? What was that? What just flew across the screen?
...were as fractured as their home province. The Chesterton Cavalry and Cuirassiers are the only survivors of the old Chesterton Trading League Army. The Ariana Fusiliers are another unit dating to before the Age of War, while the Ariana Grenadiers are a more recent addition. Shadrach's Shadowhawks and Tristram's Avengers complete the regulars. The St. Ives Armoured Cavalry is even more decentralised.
I rewound too much.
The St. Ives Lancers are the lead unit, while the Chevaux Légers operate further across the Confederation. The Capellan Cuirassiers are one of the commonality's elite regiments, but are recruited from across the realm. The Centauri Guards are an amalgamation of several older noble house units, while the Teng Hussars represent another, but have remained a separate entity. The Redfield Renegades and Sharp Rifles.
Why is Sean Penn in there in South Essex? Can somebody explain it to me? Jesus Christ. Repressed. Thank you so much, dude. Oh my God. Oh. Sharp's Rifle, Sean Bean. Okay. Thank you, Repressed. Hey, glad to see you getting the love tonight. I had an idea for a series for your lore channel if you're interested, based off the last stream, going through the gauntlet of anime, comic, video game top tiers and seeing how they do against the Emperor, ranging from Sinbad to SpongeBob. Oh my God. Sinbad to SpongeBob. I'm not quite sure how well that would go. To be honest with you, Repressed, I'm trying to get things together on my end. What happened in the family, what happened with the family right now is, you know, that the hospitalers down there taking care of. I actually have a couple of scripts ready to go. I was planning on, you know, I've been trying to get ahead recording wise so I could take care of some stuff over there and start recording again. I I have been really looking forward to getting back into the editing phase. I'm going to be replacing my computer near the end of April, and that's when I'm going to be able to do some editing again. The computer is dying. That's just how it is. I've had this computer for about 7 years now, and it's not handling much of anything well. I've got to get a new mouse, a couple other things like that, which I'm going to be able to do in a few days, which is great. But yeah, I really need, Toon Force is broken. Dude, Repressed, Kristen, Lunatic, thank you so much, my guys. I swear to God, this is kind of wild tonight. It really is. It really, really is. Oh my God. Thank you guys so much. Hey, Repressed. Okay. South Essex. I want to yell out something stupid, but my mouth is hurting too bad tonight, guys. I'm sorry.
Rifles have been raised by the respective homeworlds to bolster their defense. The Lyran Commonwealth Armed Forces going into 2787 were the largest successor state military there has ever been. While the 120 battlemech regiments they fielded had them at a slight deficit compared to the DCMS, the number of armoured and infantry units in their ranks were vast, amounting to more than 1,550 additional regiments, totaling just under 1,700. Unlike the other realms where the successor lords had complete authority over the military, for the Lyrans, General of the Armies Paul Steiner, Yarkon's younger...
I swear to God, J. Jonah Jameson, you better wage war well. Kristen, thank you, bud. Oh my God. Sean Bean Sharp would have made a great SLDF mech warrior or Aaron Donnie Lighthorse mercenary. Long live the Star League. Dude, at this point, Kristen, I'm going to be honest with you. Based off what I saw, the only competent military leader so far that I've seen out of SLDF or any of the house military so far has been Kerensky himself. Everybody else has been a massive head-butting wall failure. Especially Baby Killer, because my God, like the Taurians were only going to rebel again. That was only a matter of time. Christian, again, thank you so much, my guy. Like, honestly. Yeah, Kerensky is the only one that's shown that they're halfway competent without hurling nukes and just blasting away at things.
Younger brother was in command. When the war commenced, he took personal control over the Curitan Theatre and delegated the League border to General Amanda Lestrade. The 4 Royal Guard regiments were the best equipped and most loyal troops in the Commonwealth. Most of the LCAF belonged to one of 5 large brigades, the most massive of which was the Lyran Guards, maintaining 35 regiments split across 5 divisions. Despite their organisation, this grouping was purely for administrative reasons, as these units had no experience fighting at anything greater than regimental level. Other similarly large brigades included the Arcturan Guards, Donegal Guards, and Sky Rangers. The former officially remains a federal unit, founded to celebrate the union of the 3 nations and being the first to draw on soldiers from across the realm. But over the years, it has become increasingly linked with the Tamar Pact. The size of the LCAF brigades makes it...
I want this right here as an icon. I'm just saying. Oh, I wonder what these guys got up to. I'm just taking a brief hint.
Challenging to say which were best, with individual regiments varying massively in both experience and loyalty. The Lyran Regulars were another large unit, notably less prestigious than their Guards counterpart, but often performing better on the field. Several smaller brigades were founded by wealthy planets and nobility, recruiting heavily from those systems. These include the Donegal, Odessa, Sakhalin and York Regulars, the Hesperus Guards, and the Tamar Hussars. While the Free World's
We need the Winged Hussars yesterday.
League military was not the powerhouse it had been at the formation of the Star League,
I can't really say,
it was still
Christian,
sufficiently strong to see off their neighbours. In total,
I can't really say, from what I'm understanding from this right here, from what I'm understanding about this from everything that Sven van der Plank has said so far, Kerensky took them out, and from what Tex said, Kerensky took them out because if they stayed, there was nothing they could do. The SLDF was fundamentally done, and the houses were already gearing up. And if the SLDF did stay, it would have turned into an even bigger shit show faster than it already did. And that is a statement that bears a lot of like extensive fuckery. The Koreans were already bucking at the horse before everything happened with Amaris. Yeah, it would have killed him inside. It would have killed him inside. The Koreans were already bucking the horse before Amaris took the shot that pretty much killed the Star League. So Kerensky taking the bulk of the SLDF and leaving probably stopped this from getting even worse than it was. And we haven't even seen how it gets yet.
They had 117 Battletech regiments, plus another 1,400 assorted conventional ones. An ever-present hurdle for the
I knew I heard
when
this
bringing
before,
their might
Codis.
to bear was to secure the support of the provincial forces.
Yeah, SD, it would have done
As
nothing.
shown during the Third Hidden War,
Gear Stark, you
if
have a
any
great
duchy
night,
or
bud.
principality withheld their troops, it could spell disaster for the Captain General. Of the federal forces, the Free World's Guards and Atrian Dragoons were the best supplied and most fanatical in their loyalty. The former had all been reinforced with a 4th Battalion. The largest brigade within the FWLM, and indeed the entire inner sphere, was the Marek Militia, numbering 40 regiments until the loss of the 34th during the Phony War. They varied significantly in experience, and were most often tasked with providing protection to the many independent worlds, or ensuring the supremacy of the Captain General over the smaller provinces by maintaining a garrison within their borders.
That's a statement, Christian. Liao was calling for peace first during the Second War. Did the Koreans reach Nanking?
Occupying a middle ground between the federal and provincial forces were the Boland defenders. At the top of the provincial forces were the Fusiliers of Orient and their vassal states Orloff Grenadiers. The incredible wealth available to the Grand Duchy meant
The old
these
city
two were
was called
better
Worlds
equipped
of
than
Flame.
even
Oh
the
my
best federal
God.
units. The former were organised into 4 combined arms brigades along old Star League lines, plus a 5th Ducal Guard regiment. House Allison heaped all its love and attention on the Fusiliers, leaving the Orient Hussars to pick up the scraps. Their counterparts in the other 2 major provinces were the Marek Guard and Regulan Hussars. The Stuart Dragoons continued to operate as a de facto federal brigade, Earl David Stuart ceding control to the Captain General during the Third Hidden War. The primary offensive force of this small province was the Juggernaut Regiment, the defence left to the Home Guard. Other planets within the commonalty raised their own units, the Helm Cuirassiers and Tania Dragoons. The defenders of Andurian were responsible for protecting what was left of the fractured Andurian Duchy from Capellan
And that's in the Second Succession War?
aggression. Lastly,
Christian?
the Iron Guards were formed from the former hegemony worlds that had
Okay, that's a baller-ass icon right there for these guys. I'm just saying.
willingly sided with the Free Worlds League. The armed forces of the Federated Suns was one of the smaller militaries overall, but had a higher percentage of battle mech.
So that's going to get covered here. Liao getting pummeled so hard they're screaming uncle is going to come in this one.
132 mech regiments to more than 1,250 conventional. The AFFS had a well-organised structure on the surface, but suffered from factionalism and a provincial attitude that would cost them dearly during the war. Each march fielded an offensive brigade and a defensive march militia. A dozen smaller brigades assisted them where needed, at least in theory. Perhaps the most elite and loyal unit in existence, the Davian Brigade of Guards was the very best the ruling house could call upon. They trained extensively in combined arms operations, allowing them to make full use of their permanently assigned infantry, armor, and aerospace assets.
House Davion has some pretty good looking symbols. I do have to say that. I absolutely have to say that.
One step down, but still more than a match for most opponents on the field, were the Avalon Hussars. While they hailed from the Crucis March, it seemed extraordinarily unlikely that any aggressor would ever penetrate that far. and so in practice were scattered all across the realm. The entire brigade had been reinforced during the build-up, each regiment fielding 4 battalions apiece. The Robinson Chevaliers and Certis Fusiliers were each named for their respective March capitals, with at least 20 regiments each positioned along their border. Additionally, each March capital also raised a force purely from that one planet's population, known as the Robinson Rangers, Certis Hussars, and New Avalon Borderers.
Okay.
2 other worlds that did the same form the Argyle Lancers and Clovis Guards. The Arcadian Cuirassiers were raised from the Chesterton worlds that fell on the Davian side of the border. The Seti Hussars were a combined arms brigade modelled on Star League Light Horse regiments. The Dragon Lords came into existence during the Reunification War as a quick
Okay, that's badass. I'm just saying.
response force to combat any Taurian incursions. The Tancredi Loyalists were built around the units who had abandoned Laura Davian during the nation's civil war and sided with the future First Prince. Many of the former Star League Defense Force personnel that had decided to remain in the Inner Sphere signed on with one of the successor states, but the AFFS alone organised most of its SLDF recruits into their own units, the first among which would use their expertise to train new regiments in Star League doctrine. The Crucis Lancers was an old disbanded brigade brought back into service after the Exodus, and has since become one of their most celebrated.
I remember that
2
one.
regiments were still in training at the war's outset, but would enter service within the year. The Deneb Light Cavalry were the remains of a joint Star League Fed Sons venture known as the Rapid Deployment Mixed Armed Forces.
Okay.
Their regiments were primarily raised from the Davian member state, and those who didn't depart on the Exodus soon went over. The final element of the armed forces were the Capellan, Crucis, and Draconis March militias. Devised by John Davian as a way to turn the best of his planetary garrisons into a more mobile force, these large combined arms units added considerable strength to the AFFS on paper, but it meant that each combat region had most of its strength focused in just a handful of systems. Most planets no longer fielded their own militias, leaving them vulnerable to a sudden incursion. In terms of sheer numbers, the 5 successor states were relatively even. Each had a realistic shot at coming out on top. Quantity is just one half of the equation, however. Looking at the quality of those troops allows us to note some important facts.
Okay.
The AFFS, DCMS, and LCAF had the highest percentage of veterans and elites, whereas their counterparts in the CCAF and FWLM were slightly lacking. Less than a quarter of the Fed Sons and Lyran forces were green recruits, whereas around a third of the other realms' militaries were down on experience. On the surface then, House Davian and Steiner were looking strong, but there is another side to the coin. As previously noted, the Federated Sons forces were individually loyal to the First Prince, but struggled to cooperate with their immediate neighbours. The Lyrans had the fewest number of fanatics within their military.
And most of the Korean military is fanatical. That's a problem.
This in itself is not a problem, but both they and the Capellans had significant numbers of troops with questionable loyalties, around a third of their respective armed forces, compared to a quarter of the Draconis Combine and Free Worlds League, and just 15% of the AFFS. This had the potential to be disastrous if their soldiers started questioning the competency of their leaders, or if one of the regional blocks decided to break away.
I love how the Capellans' loyalty is not... Oh, fanatical is not bad. No, Red-Eye. Fanatical, if you're the one that has the fanatical troops, that's a very good thing. That means they're not going to turn on you no matter what. I'm just looking at the Capellans, because half of their troops, well, nearly half of their green troops are questionable at best, and a solid third of their veteran and regulars are questionable at best. Steiner is not much better.
Fleet actions would play an integral part in the First Succession War. The monstrously powerful naval-grade weapons could obliterate entire regiments in mere minutes, but any orbital strike would rely first on securing the system, or at least the local space in orbit above a world.
Hey,
The enormous Star League Navy had passed into legend. Of the more than 2,000 warships that cleared a path through the hegemony, just 12 had remained behind. These were hidden by Comstar within the Terran system, their presence kept secret from the successor states. Many Age of War era Terran hegemony designs were in widespread use with the successor state navies.
No, Red-Eye, when you're thinking about fanatical in this terms, it means no matter what, they're not going to turn. A fanatical troop is going to be, a fanatical soldier is going to be willing to fight. He is not going to surrender. He's going to fight until the last man. That's how fanatical troops work. This is fanatical troops in your own employ that have a complete dedication to your cause. They're going to be the hardest ones for an enemy to deal with because you can just tell them to do whatever and they're just going to go for it.
These include the Vincent-class corvette, Essex and Lola-class destroyers, and Aegis-class cruiser, as well as a few less common designs. A few Starleague-era designs were also dotted about, including later refits of those classes just mentioned, and a few dozen Cadett-class transports, but also a rare few heavy cruisers. The Draconis Combine Admiralty began the conflict.
Right-Eye, don't make me nuke you. They have enough.
With 8 fleets, 2 from each of the established
Black Wolf, you have
districts.
a wonderful night, my guy.
This accounted for a total of 197 warships, plus a pair of corvettes permanently attached to the 1st Proserpina Hussars. The DCA crews were particularly skilled compared to
Did anybody else see that? Where the hell are we right now?
their contemporaries, having conducted regular training exercises with the Starleague Navy. As well as the older Terran-derived designs, the Combine fielded 2 of its own. The Narukami-class destroyer is on par with the best the Starleague had to offer. A swift ship with a heavy weapons complement for its size, Narukamis can be found in every fleet. The Samarkand-class light carrier was primarily a support vessel, transporting 3 dozen aerospace fighters each. They were a powerful force multiplier, but performed poorly without support due to a lack of firepower and armor. The Capellan Confederation Navy.
Christian, I'm not too sure about that. If you look at the timeline that we're in right here, if you look at the timeline that we're in, the only really heavily populated worlds at this time would have been capitals that had been around for some times. I'm not too sure. I'd have to sit down and think about it, to be honest with you. No, long shot. I have never tried that. I have no intention of trying that. Why would you even... Oh my god. Oh my god.
Navy, like their ground-based counterpart, was the smallest of the 5 successor states at just 157 warships.
Excellent chat to Nuke
A
Long Shot.
significant percentage of those were also older designs, whether Terran or homegrown. Each of the 5 major commonalities maintains a fleet of their own, while a reserve fleet packs the heaviest punch, moving to whichever front is most in need of the additional firepower. 2 designs of note have come out of the Capellan Confederation. The newest is the enormous Soil-class heavy cruiser, weighing in at 1.5 million tons.
What the...
This vessel is built around a single party piece, the capital-grade mass driver. It is a challenging weapon to use, as it requires the entire ship to be aimed directly at their target. But if it lands a hit, the mass driver has the potential to obliterate another warship in a single blast.
Okay.
Before the conflict erupted, the Free Worlds League had purchased several soils from their rivals at exorbitant prices. The older design is the Dushiwang-class battlecruiser. This vessel actually originates within the long-defunct Duchy of Liao, and was the very first constructed by the new Confederation. Its all-energy weapon loadout allows it to operate for extended periods without resupply. The largest fleet remaining within the Inner Sphere belonged to the Lyran Commonwealth, which possessed 217 warships.
Okay.
Each of the 3 states within the Commonwealth fields a pair of fleets and another squadron in orbit above their capital. The Lyrans employ a trio of distinctive designs throughout their navy. The newest and most numerous is the Mako-class corvette. One of the best ships in its class, matching any produced by the Starleague, the Mako has both the speed of a corvette and the weapons and armor to match even a small destroyer. The Commonwealth-class light cruiser is an older design, put back into production with new upgraded components.
Okay, so if I'm looking at this right now, the Caretans are definitely in the strongest position, but I got a feeling they're going to do something stupid that doesn't allow them to take advantage of this strength. They have the most loyal troops. They have some of the best ships. They don't have as huge of a border, but I just don't think that they're gonna. I think they're gonna do something stupid. The one in the probably the worst position is Liao. I think the Capellans are in the worst position because they're just sandwiched between the Federated Sons of the Free Worlds League, and their territory isn't really that. They share very long borders with both. Now, even though the Lyrans have the largest fleet, they also have the largest set of borders and a periphery state that they don't. Well, it's not even a state; it's a group of independent worlds right now. I'm just saying. It is a massive border that they have, so their navy is going to be more stretched. Period. But who do I think is going to screw it up? Who do I think is going to screw it up? Let's go.
It has become a staple of the realm's naval defense. The largest ship employed by House Steiner is the Tharkad class. Despite being 4.5 times the size, it can match the speed of the Mako, but carries a far larger weapons load. The Free Worlds League as a whole maintains a federal navy, but so too do 3 of the provinces, Andurian, Orient, and Regulus. Altogether, they can field 159 warships. The FWLN is split into 5 fleets, the 1st through 5th based at Dudonne, Orient, Kanata, Tamarind, and Gibraltar. The skills of the crews across the various federal and provincial forces are fairly standard, but the Andurian Squadron is notably reluctant to cooperate with the Captain General, much like their compatriots within the Defenders of Andurian.
Okay.
2 vessels define the Free World's Navy. The first is the League-class destroyer. The design originated way back in the 24th century, but all of these older vessels have since been decommissioned or destroyed, the last during the Third Hidden War. An updated League class entered service much more recently with several key improvements. Twice its size, weighing in at 1.1 million tons, is the Atreus class battleship. When the class entered service shortly before the Reunification War, it outperformed anything fielded by the Terran Hegemony or nascent Star League. Centuries of development have made it lose some of its luster, but it's still an effective and deadly opponent.
It's a big boy.
Last of all is the Federated Sons Navy, which operated 184 warships in 2787. These are divided into 4 fleets: the Coreward Fleet facing the Capellan Confederation, the Spinward Fleet towards the Draconis Combine, the Rimward Fleet dealing with the Taurian Concordat and rest of the periphery border, and the Crucis Fleet acting as a mobile reserve. House Davian has 4 ship classes unique to its navy. The Robinson-class transport and New Certis-class carrier were 2 vessels born in the turbulent times following the Davian Civil War. First Prince Alexander hoped these new classes would help bind the remnants of the old Federated peacekeeping forces from the fractured marches together and give them regional pride within the then new AWFS. The Davian-class destroyer went through 2 iterations. While the first was somewhat of a disappointment considering the name it bore, the evolution showed considerably more promise. The largest vessel in their navy was the ancient but still capable Defender-class battlecruiser. Among its number was the flagship of the entire navy, the FSS Golden Lion.
Okay. Okay, so now that I have this breakdown, if I was looking at which one of the successor states here, if I was looking at which one of the successor states is probably in the best position geopolitically, it would be the Free Worlds League. The Free Worlds League is, in my opinion, the absolute best position because they are bordered by the hegemony, which is basically falling apart at the seams. The Lyrans, which even though they have the largest navy and they have a very sizable military, they have a much more aggressive neighbor to worry about in the Cretans. Their other border is shared with Canopus, and I don't think the Cat Girls are going to start any shit anytime soon. And then the other border that they share, the other long border, is with the Capellans. And if the Capellans decide they're going to start anything at all, they have to worry about the Davians at that point. Steiner and Merrick hate each other. Steiner and Merrick may hate each other, but geopolitically, Steiner would have a lot more to worry about from the Caretans than the Free Worlds League. So the Free Worlds League is in the best geopolitical position. I'm just saying.
Besides the successor states, a few other minor powers also participated in the First Succession War. The hegemony armed forces, such as they were, consisted of those...
I'm not saying they're in the best position overall, Jason. I'm not saying they're in the best... The hegemony is in a dumpster, Rat-Eye. They are in an absolute dumpster. Everybody wants their worlds, and they're barely together right now. I'm not saying that the Free Worlds League is in the best position overall. I'm just saying they're in the best position geopolitically. Their section of space borders the Capellans, who, quite simply put, can't, like, their space is too narrow to be fighting two wars on differing fronts. And if they try to fight two wars on differing fronts, they would literally get raided to the point where they couldn't field any kind of industry whatsoever. In fact, if that does happen and they don't get raided in their core worlds, I'm going to be kind of shocked. And with Steiner, with House Steiner and the Lyran Commonwealth, the Commonwealth has a much, much more competent and powerful military on the Caretan border than they do the Free Worlds League border. So I'm just saying geopolitically.
SLDF units who had not followed Kerensky on his exodus. In total, 17 divisions and
I'd say the
16
Federation Sons is in
independent
probably the
regiments
worst
stayed
position.
behind. Theoretically, this amounted to 85 battlemech and 84 infantry regiments, but all of those had suffered heavy losses during the Stalag Civil War, and so their actual strength was a mere fraction of that. The vast majority were located within the Hegemony Corps, but further afield were other remnants of the Stalag, still camped at their final duty stations. The most notable of these was the Eredani Light Horse on Trondheim, who would hold...
Yeah, point man. Like I said, flat out, the only reason I'm saying that they're in the best position geopolitically, because that's the only position they're in. They nuked themselves. That's just stupid.
Vigil on the world as they waited to see if Kerensky would return. The former territorial states were cautious about becoming dragged into the looming succession war and remained on the defensive for the rest of the 28th century. The Taurian Defence Force, while remaining officially neutral in the so-called Freedom War, had nonetheless suffered significant losses during the uprising. The TDF in 2787 fielded just 7 mech regiments and 63 conventional. 1st, 2nd and 4th Corps had been completely wiped out participating in the Freedom War, and only the Pleiades Hussars had survived from the 3rd.
Oh my god.
3 new regiments had been raised, which went some way to replacing those losses. The Concordat Cuirassiers, Concordat Jaegers, and the Red Chasseurs. The Taurian Guard Corps, consisting of the Concordat Commandos, Taurian Guards, and Taurian Velites, had remained within the Hades cluster, and so had not been touched by the conflict. The Concordat Navy was the only periphery fleet to have surviving warships, TCS Perrin and Vandenberg, both hidden deep inside Flanagan's Nebula. The Magistracy Armed Forces mirrored their counterparts in the TDF, 7 battlemech and 63 conventional regiments. Freedom War losses had cost the Magistracy Royal Guard the 2nd Canopian Cuirassiers, the Chasseurs à Cheval had lost the 3rd Canopian Light Horse, and the Canopian Fusiliers were down their 4th Regiment. The People's Volunteers Brigade had been devastated. None had survived to see independence. Reventer's Iron Hand was the only new unit formed in the intervening years. The Alliance Military Corps was now a scant 3 battlemech regiments, plus another 25 of infantry, armour and artillery. Notably, AMC...
I told you, the Outer Worlds Alliance, if it doesn't get pounded, I don't know what to say about it.
Called for a greater reliance on aerospace fighters, mostly because mechs were symbolically tied to the atrocities committed by Amos Forlow during the Reunification War.
Baby killer.
And the Alliance maintained around 10 regiments worth. all of the Alliance military corps had been involved in the Freedom War to some degree, the survivors organised into completely new units. The Alphanats Guards protected the capital and ruling Avalar family, the Alliance Grenadiers were stationed on the key industrial world of Lushan, and the Balagora Defenders were formed out of what remained of the old Fusiliers Brigade. The only other Periphery nation to have anything more than planetary militia was the new Finnmark Free Republic. Based around a one-time provincial capital of the Rimwell's Republic, they were able to field a standing army of 2 mech regiments and a dozen more conventional ones. The other microstates had never acquired a military of their own, but the increase in piracy, particularly from the neighbouring Cercinus Federation, meant that small mercenary groups could find regular employment with them. The Star League Civil War had shown that mercenaries would be an essential part of any future conflict. Whereas before the successor states had been content for local governments or nobility to hire small bands as needed, now they sought out the ever-increasing number of regiments forming from both the SLDF remnants and the soldiers of the Amaris Empire as they were released from POW camps. An exhaustive list of every one of them would take too long, but a few of the larger groups are worth mentioning.
Okay.
The Northwind Highlanders had first entered into a long-term contract with the Capellan Confederation in 2365, and had at least one of their 6 regiments serving alongside the CCAF for over 400 years. They were the largest merc unit to have survived the fall of the Star League. The Stalingrad Division had remained in the Inner Sphere, accepting a contract with the
That's an unfortunate damn name.
Federated Sons. The surviving 5 regiments formed the Screaming Eagles. The Elysian Lancers had at one time been the largest of all mercenary groups, but the Civil War had seen 5 of their regiments disbanded. Now they served the Lyran Commonwealth. The Always Faithful were a brand new unit in service to the Confederation, with an unusual story. The 3 regiments were formed from veterans of the Star League Civil War, but notably consisted of soldiers from both sides of the conflict. The Blue Star Regulars were another of similar background. 2 of the 3 regiments were led by recipients of Kerensky's Blue Star Medal, while the other one once fought for Amaris.
Very true, Christian.
Now they fought for Davian. The Lexington Combat Group were once 3 SLDF independent regiments stationed within either the Outworlds Alliance or Magistracy of Canopus, miraculously surviving both the Uprising and Terran campaign. They also signed on with the Federated Sons. The Gravewalkers were an ancient mercenary unit consisting of 2 regiments. Their history goes further back than any other, their origins lost to time. They had found a home for themselves in the Magistracy of Canopus, though they were not yet employed by House Centrella.
They were just there for the cat girls.
The 12-Star Guard were another demi-brigade of former SLDF regiments in service to Liao. Of the 5 successor states, the Federated Sons was the largest employer, positioning its 13 regiments and pair of battalions along the Capellan border. The Confederation had most of their 13 regiments deployed to face them. The Draconis Combine and Lyran Commonwealth had 7 regiments each, plus another battalion-sized unit, all of which they deployed to just one of their borders. The Freeworlds League was sorely lacking, having hired only Gladstone's gladiators. A handful of other mercenaries were scattered around the periphery, though none had yet found employment with those nations. The First Succession War would see a new type of brutality unleashed on the Inner Sphere. Throughout the Age of War, conflicts were governed by the Ares Conventions. Though not without their problems, they did help to reduce civilian casualties. When they were rescinded at the onset of the Reunification War, it became acceptable to slaughter tens of thousands as long as the military objective was accomplished. The Star League Civil War had seen the Amaris Empire use entire cities as human shields, or deliberate destruction of whole populations to create humanitarian disasters that would slow Kerensky's advance. Very quickly, the military leaders of the successor states determined that in the First Succession War, the extermination of cities would become the objective itself. The death toll would soon reach apocalyptic levels.
Oh boy.
The stage was set, troops were in place, intentions declared. Now everyone waited to see who would make the first move.
Well, this is gonna get ugly. They've skipped the preamble and they're jumping. Oh God, Prophet, we're returning to Armageddon. Armageddon comes. That's the name of the segment. Thank you, Prophet. Yeah, this is about to suck. Wait, what? GW revealed it? There's gonna be a technically fourth war for Armageddon? I gotta look at that later. Oh, God. Oh, boy.
At the dawn of 2787, the doomsday clock was at 1 minute to midnight. The successor states had declared war on each other. All travel and interstate commerce had ground to a halt. The people of the Inner Sphere were frozen in terror, waiting to see where the first strike would land. As yet, no one had made a move, but behind the scenes,
F in chat for the death toll that's soon to be revealed. Jesus.
each nation was scrambling to be the first to launch a knockout blow before they themselves were attacked.
Oh, God.
While the last of the successor lords were claiming rulership of the Star League, Jerome Blake arrived on Tharkad to meet with the Archon. He explained to her his desire to see Comstar recognized as a neutral party. In return, he would continue to operate the HPG network within the Commonwealth, allowing them to pass messages between themselves and to neighbouring states. Seizing the facilities was always an option available to Jennifer Steiner. She, like each of her rivals, had in her navy a small number of individuals who were qualified to operate the exceedingly rare mobile HPGs, a technology that had now all but vanished along with the rest of the SLDF. But it would take time to train a whole new workforce to take over the hyperpulse generators, time which she could scarcely afford to lose at this crucial hour.
Red Eye, immediately prior to this, now we already covered this in previous live streams, mainly through text talks, but Kerensky, after the Golden Age ended, Amaris came to power in the Periphery. He got close to the ruling Cameron at the time, executed him, took over the hegemony, and Kerensky waged a war to take it back. Then Kerensky took the remaining survivors of the Star League force that he had and set off to the deep expanse of space, because he knew that war was going to come. He knew that it was going to come, and there was nothing he could do about it. So he took his veterans and left, along with the fleet, what was left of his fleet. This, 71 said it best. This war is over the Star League's corpse, really.
Having experienced firsthand the disruption caused by the sudden loss of communications following the Amaris coup, Jennifer was amenable to Blake's suggestion, but was wary that she would be at a disadvantage if the other state lords refused. Blake happily informed her that she was the last to sign the agreement, after which Steiner gladly consented. Jerome Blake was lying, however.
Of course he was.
The Archon was the first he had met with. He was banking on the growing hostility preventing the states from conferring with each other on his activities. Each successor lord believed that they would soon be ruler over all, so the activities of the lowly Minister of Communications were of little interest to them. By the time he returned to Terra early the next year, Blake had managed to get all 5 to sign the Communications Protocol of 2787, formally recognizing HPGs as sovereign territory, acknowledging their neutrality, and agreeing to make all further payments to Comstar using their own sea bills.
Nice. We have the gold standard established.
The Draconis Combine was still slowly chipping away at the Terran hegemony, taking the planets Deneb-Algedi and Styx in the first weeks of January, cutting off the belligerent Ingolsmund from its allies.
No, Rat Eye.
They quickly seized the worlds of Nirasaki and Quinton soon after. Later in the year, they struck at the LTV aerospace facility orbiting Ingolsmund's moon, destroying the few warships the fledgling alliance had. The Coordinator's main focus was elsewhere, however, as they continued to amass forces on their border, ready to strike at their more powerful neighbor.
Rat Eye, really what you're looking at is, basically, there's the 5 successor states. None of them really like each other. They all have a problem with each other, especially the ones that border each other. And now the only person that was daddy has left the building. So the Star League has left the building, and now the kids are going to fight it out.
With the Combine seemingly focused elsewhere in the Terran hegemony and Lyran Commonwealth, the AFFS continued its preparations for a strike at the Chesterton Commonality. Over 50 regiments had been transferred to staging posts along the border, their initial list of targets including key Capellan industrial worlds. To ensure that Kurita didn't launch any opportunistic land grabs once the campaign was underway, Davian ordered a strike of his own against the planet David. The raid was a great success for the AFFS. The Kuritan commander only seemed able to mobilize half of the garrison, allowing the raiders time to seize significant quantities of munitions and spare parts before withdrawing, going completely unnoticed with the 5 other regiments on world. The Free World League's intelligence agency, SAFE, was reporting to the Captain General that Kurita was days away from launching a major invasion of the Lyran Commonwealth. Furthermore, the Archon seemed to have serious concerns about a new secret army emerging from the former Rimwell's Republic, leaving the nation besieged on all sides. With the LCAF ordered into defensive positions, Maddox felt comfortable turning his attention towards softer targets on their Spinwood flank. In late February, a quarter of the massive Marek Militia Brigade was moved to the border of the Sarna Commonality, as well as almost 40 conventional regiments and the FWLN 2nd Fleet. Their invasion would take aim at the Commonality capital, right in the heart of the Confederation. It would begin with a simultaneous assault on Harsfeld, Raman, Second Chance, and Vanra. The first 2 were secured quickly, facing only minimal resistance from the planetary militia. The Raman Lancers were not on world to defend their home planet, instead garrisoned on the neighbouring Second Chance, where they came face to face with a trio of FWLM regiments. The first shots were fired in the distant reaches of the system, as 2 patrolling vessels of the Sarna Commonality fleet moved to engage the escorting trio of Freeworld's warships. First kill went to the CCS Solstice, her enormous mass driver gutting one of the lead destroyers in a single shot. The surviving Marek vessels had the advantage after they closed range and quickly overcame the defenders, destroying the larger Capellan battleship using nuclear missiles. Solstice attempted to retaliate with its own arsenal, but only destroyed a handful of dropships before exploding herself. The Confederation had now also learned that weapons of mass destruction were fair game in this new succession war. As the FWLS Sorunda entered orbit, they saw heavy activity at the spaceports below. It wasn't clear if the vessels about to depart were military, but the threat that dropships and aerospace fighters carrying nuclear ordnance posed was too great a risk to wait to find out. They promptly unleashed devastating orbital fire on the facilities, obliterating the fleeing civilian government within. With their loss and the realization that the planetary governors were prepared to abandon them, the Raman Lancers began to fall apart. They begrudgingly accepted General Rosenkoff's call to surrender an hour later. The defenders on Vanra, despite being outnumbered 3-1, had the home field advantage as they had been stationed on world for almost 25 years. Their aerospace fighters were able to intercept and shoot down one of the approaching overlords, which crashed into the deep wilderness, forcing the rest of the regiment to redeploy to assist their comrades. The Capellans got there first, however, killing the few survivors and then ambushing the relief force. Only 1 battalion made it out of the forest. The battle for the capital city proved a costly affair. The charges would not give an inch, and eventually the invaders used orbital fire to level their positions.
Of course.
Half of Utrecht was destroyed in the bombardment, as were the remaining CCAF. Opposition on Second Chance had been lighter than expected, as the Capellans had only just reassigned one of the regiments in garrison to seize the Terran hegemony system of Hall. To prevent Liao reinforcements from being dispatched to help the occupied systems, a raiding force was sent to Aldebaran, deep within the Tikhonov commonality. Nearby units hunkered down, anticipating other attacks. Kenyon Maddox was an ambitious man and sound military strategist. He was never wasteful or reckless with his forces, earning the respect of his commanders. In due course, this talent would earn him the nickname the Eagle. Despite his main focus being the campaign against the Capellan Confederation, he never took his eye off his other neighbour. The League Central Coordination and Command Group saw a target of opportunity on their doorstep. The Bolson shipyards within the new Kyoto system were a major resupply and refit center for the Lyran Navy. Destroying these facilities early would pay dividends in any future escalation between the two. On February 14th, they dispatched a trio of destroyer squadrons to the system, supported by 2 aerospace wings. Defending the facility was a squadron of corvettes, including 2 of the survivors from the Bolan campaign, and an aerospace regiment of their own. The battle was fast and frenetic. The lighter Lyran warships were quickly overwhelmed, with almost a dozen destroyed in just 15 minutes. The engagement ended prematurely though, when Colonel Thompson piloted their damaged aerospace fighter into the Matic flagship's bridge, sending it on a collision trajectory of its own with the shipyards, after which both sides withdrew to lick their wounds.
Oh, great.
A second larger naval engagement followed just 10 days later on the Lyran's opposite border. The raid on Skondia the previous year had shown the LCAF to be incapable of stopping a determined assault. The Draconis Combine Admiralty formed a new 45 warship fleet, pairing them with 6 battlemech regiments and several more supporting units, tasked with the objective of pushing all the way to the provincial capital of Skye. The first step would be a return to Skondia, where this time they would conquer the world for the Dragon. In the months leading up to the attack, the solitary mech regiment and garrison had been reinforced by 2 others, plus 5 warships and 20 escort dropships.
Hey, Alan, when you watched the Turning Point attack cross, you forgot the credits. And hey, boss, what's up, Alan? Thanks, bud. Are you talking about the song at the end? I had already heard that one, dude.
While this meant it was one of the better defended worlds in the Commonwealth, it could not hope to match the approaching task force. Upon arrival at the system's nadir jump point, Pedersen quickly realized that things had gone horribly wrong. Since the attack on New Kyoto, the Lyran Navy had been pooling their warships in the region into a single fleet based out of Skondia, now numbering some 50 Lyran warships and another 200 smaller vessels. Most of the fleet was in orbit over the planet itself, which gave the Taisho the opportunity to withdraw. Instead, he commanded all the ships under his command to form up into a cone and dove straight into the heart of the defences, punching a hole for the transports to reach Skondia. Van Hadden's warships were primarily anti-capital vessels, which meant despite their best efforts, they were only able to destroy around 20% of the smaller dropships before they entered orbit. Focusing on the transports also allowed the many carriers in the DCA fleet to launch their aerospace fighters, which inflicted huge losses on the Lyrans. By the end of March, 2/3 of the Commonwealth fleet had been destroyed, including the Admiral's flagship.
What? The Lyrans are this bad?
The Curitans had lost half of their force by comparison. The ground campaign now swung even more in the Combine's favour, as they were able to call down orbital fire on exposed Lyran positions. Nevertheless, they held out for 2 months.
It wasn't just songs, it was also news and Mike the editor working in Van Zandt's militia artillery. I thought I saw that, Alan. I thought I saw that. Thank you, though. Dude, this is ridiculous. How'd they lose that bad? All they had to do was wipe out the Navy and then send in fighters to finish off the dropships. Go for it. Why are we... Oh my god. Ugh. There's already about 12 or 13 incidents in Battletech already that I'll just be like, come on, man. They lack point defenses? And fighter capability? Bro, what? What? You always build your navy to counter your enemy's navy. It's what you do. Why?
Months before calling in the remaining naval support for extraction.
Caden, the Curitans brought in a small force to attack a world The Lyrans had 50 ships and they lost 2/3 of them.
Back in the Free World League, the Eagle was driving his force onwards. Hasad, Shepao and Singhai were taken from the Capellans by his advancing Marek militia, but the primary target lay within another region of space. New Dallas was one of the strongest planets left to the Terran hegemony, and had become a provincial capital after the loss of Tirfing. The planetary militia had fought Amaris tooth and nail, and were expected to be equally belligerent towards any successor state that approached. 3 FWLM regiments entered the system on March 20th, and ran face first into the reformed New Dallas Rangers, equipped with Royal Tier battle mechs piloted by veterans of the Star League Civil War.
Oh boy.
The Marek militia was completely wiped out, and the Atrian Dragoons were on the back foot until they resorted to using their nuclear arsenal.
Of course.
300,000 within Caddo City were vaporized in order to eliminate the pair of militia battalions in defense, after which the survivors...
Okay, so not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. Not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be, but still not great.
...surrendered. New Dallas was in Marek hands, its worth now all but useless.
Good job, asshole.
Within a month of the Draconis Combine making landfall on Skondia, Jennifer Steiner ordered a series of reprisal raids. She did not want to commit her military to an offensive against the Dragon, but she hoped that keeping the coordinator off balance would reduce the number of attacks coming her way. There was no better way to achieve this than a strike on the capital itself.
What?
This dangerous assignment was given to Duke Graham Kalswa and his Tamar Tigers. Their transport for the mission was one of the few remaining Potemkin-class troop cruisers, with a full complement of 25 dropships. They expected an enormous naval presence, but they found only 2 smaller warships. The location of the DCA fleet was a mystery, but they had no time to consider it. Taking full advantage of their weakness, the Nightwind made a beeline for the colossal shipyards.
Are they attempting a Doolittle raid? This sounds very dumb.
Largest within the Combine, and destroyed the facility while the Tigers made their descent. The defending mech regiments huddled around Imperial City, allowing the attackers to ride roughshod over the HE continent. Several major factories were destroyed before the Duke withdrew 3 days later.
What?
Minoru Hirita had been humiliated by how powerless he was to respond. The famous...
Oh my god, they actually did it. So it wasn't a bad idea. You know what the difference, I've always found the difference between a very, very stupid and bad idea and a humiliation and everybody looking at you like you're a moron, everybody looking at you like a genius, is whether or not something like this wins. Congratulations.
Black Pearl at the heart of the Draconis Combine had been desecrated. Worse was to follow at Dieron in April. The DCA had a warship squadron in orbit over the world, part of their ongoing invasion of the Terran hegemony. They were tasked with the defense of the Stellar Trek Naval Yard, the main objective for the Lyran raid. A half-dozen Steiner warships
Red-Eye, then it's a
appeared in
genius
system,
idea.
unleashing 2 squadrons of nuclear-armed assault dropships to clear a path for them. The aging Aegis-class Selene was blown apart by their missiles, forcing the Essex destroyers to break off, giving the Tharkad and Commonwealth-class cruisers a clear shot at the shipyard. Radstad was undergoing service and decoupled from the facility with most of her guns still offline and
That's
barely
a bad
any
idea.
crew aboard. She attempted to ram the largest battlecruiser, but was destroyed before making contact. Gallery and York now launched their nuclear payload at the facility, destroying another of the Draconis Combine's vital space docks. The 4 DCA destroyers regrouped, almost succeeding in destroying the Lyran flagship before they themselves were eliminated. Meanwhile, the raiding party was making landfall. They had their own objectives on the ground.
Exactly,
This
M1.
was the first outing for Colonel Raymond Hempstead's stealths. The Lyran Commonwealth had tremendous faith in his abilities, putting the mercenary commander in charge of the entire operation. The reason he had such a solid reputation was because his unit had acquitted themselves well during the Star League Civil War, fighting for Amaris as the 23rd Republican Light Lancers. After 4 hours on the ground, it became clear that something had gone wrong in space. they had not received a single message from the 4 surviving cruisers. Ground operations were quickly wrapped up and the dropships departed. A brief search of their last known location turned up only wreckage fragments, forcing the raiders to withdraw to their jump ships. The fate of the warships remains a mystery, the answer perhaps lying somewhere in the debris field known as the Junkyard, the detritus left from the space battle during Operation Chieftain. It's possible that the Lyran ships fell victim to something lurking in the radioactive debris.
Oh, that's nice.
In the neighbouring system, the Curetans were again picking at the remains of the Terran hegemony. When they arrived at Safel, however, they found it was defended by elements of the Blue Star Irregulars. The former soldiers of the Amaris Empire Armed Forces knew the location of a hidden AEAF cache and had raced ahead to secure it for the Federated Suns. Rather than engage them, the Taisar purposely diluted his strength by spreading them across the planet, then withdrew shortly after. This was exactly as Warlord Jinjiro Kurita had ordered. Safel was just one of a dozen minor skirmishes the AWFS had won against the Draconis Combine during 2787. Another came at Kaf, where a force sent to flank the Confederation and establish a link to Terra defeated a small force of CCAF and DCMS opponents, evening the score for the debacle on town. Several other hegemony systems were taken to broaden their control of that vital link. FedSun's military intelligence was receiving reports from one of their marshals that something big was going on just across the border, but the head of MI2 for the region had dismissed his concerns. John Davian was busy marshalling his forces for a strike at the Chesterton commonality, and was not hearing anything that might worry him from the Draconis March.
Oh God.
On May 1st, 2787, Jinjiro Kurita began the largest offensive campaign of the Succession Wars. 15 mech regiments and a further 55 conventional units stationed around Tanel moved simultaneously against the 7 systems within the Cussor pocket. They struck so quickly that most worlds failed to alert the rest of the Federated Suns that they were under attack. The best AWFS units within the region had already been redeployed ahead of the planned Capellan offensive, leaving only second-line regiments in garrison. The mercenaries on Marduk fled at their approach, while others stood and fought, not realizing that they were at the epicenter of a Kuritan tsunami.
Oh boy.
The attack on the Paris Bulge was just the first of 3 DCMS task forces set to advance into Davian territory. Jinjiro had amassed over 50 battlemech regiments along the border, representing more than a third of the entire Draconis Combine mustered soldiery. Supporting them were 150 regiments of conventional forces. On May 4th, Jinjiro led a second attack into the Dahar combat region, spearheaded by the First Sword of Light. At the same time, a third wave crashed into the Clovis combat region. On point was the Third Sword of Light, and with them was none other than the coordinator Minoru Kurita himself. Their main goal was the regional headquarters on Clovis. The FedSun's navy had only a trio of warships on hand to defend the system, while the Draconis Combine Admiralty assigned a squadron from their third fleet to clear the path for Minoru. Things concluded in space predictably, but it gave the 3 Davian armor regiments and the planet's own Clovis guards some vital time to reinforce their position. They were outnumbered 5-1, but were nonetheless able to hold their ground during the first week. ISF agents had reported an additional 2 mech regiments somewhere on world, which caused the Curetans to fight conservatively until they realized their mistake. Furthermore, the presence of the coordinator prevented them from doing anything as dishonorable as using weapons of mass destruction.
Look, I understand that you're trying to convince yourself you're not a shithead, but drinking the Kool-Aid that heavily? Really, bro? This is like the Emperor. This is like them trying to say the Emperor didn't know what the official Assassinorum was up to. I don't believe that for a split second. Come on, you knew what your guys were doing.
The Field Marshal had been desperately calling for reinforcements throughout the attack, but the Combine invasion was so absolute that near every other system in range was also under
Alan,
attack.
you have a nice night.
Only a single vessel arrived from Kosa, but by this point, Simons could see the battle was lost. He ordered them to call off their landing while he would attempt to withdraw. While some of the survivors were able to escape, the Field Marshal was not among them. His dropship intercepted by Curitan aerospace fighters and destroyed while leaving atmosphere. His death was a major blow to both coordination and morale in the region. It's often said that the decision not to attack the Lyran Commonwealth, as everyone had expected the Draconis Combine to do, was made by Minoru to comply with the tenets of Bushido, which he held in high esteem. Bushido says that a weak opponent, as House Steiner had proven themselves to be, should be given time to prepare themselves further, so that they might fight honourably. In truth, Jinjiro had long ago convinced his father to strike at the Federated Suns, and their actions along the Lyran border were simply part of an elaborate ruse, one that had successfully duped the rest of the Inner Sphere. Word of the invasion did not reach First Prince John Davian on Muskegon until the 3rd week of May. He frantically dispatched orders to those units he could reach to withdraw from the Draconis March and establish a new defensive line at the edge of the Crucis March. Unfortunately,
oh my god, that's a nightmare scenario. That's a nightmare scenario.
The provincial attitudes that plagued the AFFS were preventing any sort of coordinated response. Some regiments would not abandon their homes, and food.
MN01, this is the to be perfectly clear, this is the equivalent of this will be the equivalent of Japan attacking the United States and not stopping at Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. Army setting up a defensive line at Colorado.
Foolishly tried to hunker down and weather the storm.
You have a great night, okay?
Others, who had only recently been moved to the Draconis border, up and fled the moment they received their orders. Federated Suns' losses were horrific during this first month, and the defensive line that the First Prince had hoped to establish was full of holes. The DCMS employed an unusual strategy to great effect during their advance. They would arrive in system, quickly destroy all communications facilities, naval assets, and any Fed Suns troops in the open, and then promptly depart.
Yeah, this is from what I'm hearing from this is the equivalent of that happening in World War II. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and the attack is so severe, and they are starting to attack the entire West Coast. And the only option that they have is to abandon the entire West Coast and set up a defensive line at Colorado. I mean, yeah, Prophet. Thank you, Prophet. Fun fact, Japan did invade Alaska in 1942. It wasn't a serious invasion.
They spent as little time on ground as possible before jumping to their next target. This left large pockets of resistance in their wake, but those troops had no means of leaving the system or coordinating an effective defense.
Okay, this is actually smart.
In the subsequent months, less experienced second-line Curitan units would arrive to mop up what was left. The advance was happening so quickly that tracking exactly where the front line was became almost impossible, both for the AWF.
So you're saying it's worse than... Okay, so basically, from what I've seen from this, they had the entire thing separated into 3 different spheres of control in the Federated Suns, and they literally seceded an entire one of them to the Cretans right out of the gate, setting up a defensive line at the start of the second. This is fucking horrible.
FS commanders trying to organize a defense, and for us historians attempting to follow along. Centuries removed from the conflict, we can only make vague approximations as to how far Kurita had penetrated into the Federated Suns. By the end of the first month, the DCMS had made serious inroads into 2 of the Draconis March operational areas. Almost all of the Clovis combat region had been taken, most of Dahar and Robinson, and half a dozen systems within Fairfax. All this had been achieved with very few casualties.
Oh my God.
The only notable losses were the 1st and 3rd Sword of Light, who had been at the forefront of several major battles. An elite corps of survivors would go on to form the new 6th and 8th Sword of Light regiments, adopting as their sigil the Pillars of Ivory and Jade.
The line would have been the Mississippi River.
The success of Jinjiro's campaign was so shocking that 3 mortal enemies, the Capellan Confederation, Free Worlds League, and Lyran Commonwealth, briefly contemplated signing a mutual non-aggression pact with the powerful Draconis Combine. Ultimately, Steiner had already lost too many worlds to allow it, and there was too much ill will between Liao and Marek for an alliance there. By comparison to the Curitan onslaught, Kenyan Marek's 50 regiment invasion of the Capellan Confederation was positively quaint. In May, they seized control of Old Kentucky without a fight after discovering the planetary garrison had fled before their approach. How Steiner was a constant irritant though, periodically probing the defences of the Boland Thumb. A raid on Roche turned into a full assault, one which cost the Boland Defenders Brigade another of their units. Significant use of WMDs scarred the world to the point where the LCAF abandoned it soon after.
Shit!
Roche fell back into Marek hands, but there was nothing of value left in the debris. The only other major action was when the Free Worlds League took Wyatt, a former Terran system that the Lyrans had seized a few years earlier. Despite being the first to declare war on each other, the Lyran League border remained one of the quietest during this early phase of the war. The Marek militia continued their advance in July, quickly seizing Shamdo and Fact. Wazan seemed as if it would fall just as easily. A pair of Marek militia regiments made landfall and took both the capital and spaceport without incident, but scouts then discovered the presence of the Old Kentucky Lancers. They had dug in at one of the smaller cities, awaiting Holbright's approach. She instead ordered the firebombing of the city, wiping out half of the regiment and countless civilians within. Things played out in similar fashion on Kori. The units sent to take the world were engaged by one of the CCAF's new regiments formed from SLDF remnants. They withdrew from the spaceport after a brief clash and set up positions within the capital city. An additional 2 companies of catapults bolstered their defense, straight from the planet's mech factories. This prompted Colonel Gaines to call in orbital strikes, again demolishing large parts of the city. The survivors withdrew into the hills. With the exception of picking at the Terran hegemony bones, the Capellan Confederation armed forces had so far barely played a part in the First Succession War. The Mashkarovka had kept Barbara Liao informed of the growing Davian task force near Chesterton, and it had blinded her to the Marek invasion that came from the opposite direction. Now she sought to regain some of the initiative. At the risk of coming into conflict with a third successor state, the Capellan Chancellor gathered together a trio of Liao and Tikhonov Lancers and tasked them with seizing Davian worlds within the Clovis combat region before Kurita could organize an assault.
Huh? Why? 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 That's... The Federated Suns are getting all they can handle right now. They're not a threat. But the Free Worlds League is invading you right now. So you're going to invade the Federated Suns and give yourself a border with the Caretans? That's a dumb idea. But that doesn't make any sense, Sean.
She recognized that each realm would have Terra as one of its main targets for the war, and it was worth the risk to shut the Federated Suns out of any future battle for humanity's homeworld. By August, she had taken Angel, Rio, and Tybalt. While they prepared for their next jump, Barbara turned her attention towards dealing with the Eagle.
Okay.
The brutal tactics employed by the Marek militia colonels on Kori and Wazan had failed to eliminate the planetary garrisons, and now the survivors rose up in rebellion. Further back, the Grand Duchy of Orient had sent a pair of its regiments to garrison the New Worlds. The Hussard Lancers struck at the newly arrived forces before they had settled into defensive positions. In September, the Marek militia assault force redeployed in an effort to stamp out the rebellion, but they proved particularly stubborn. The CCAF launched their follow-on attacks against another trio of worlds within the Clovis combat region the following month. By the end of November, Heen, New Florence, and Ronald had all been added to the Tikhonov commonality. That same month proved to be the last for the few remaining defenders on Kori and Wazan. Orient dispatched more garrison forces in December to defend the Free World's latest conquests and free up the Marek militia to continue towards Sana. Or at least, that was their plan, until the Capellan Navy
Dark.
ambushed their waiting jumpships. The League warships in orbit above the worlds attempted to move to their aid, but the distance was far too great. The Liao vessels now moved to intercept. Their victory was a decisive one. All 7 Free Worlds League Navy ships were destroyed at the cost of only 2 from the Confederation, plus a third that lost all drive. This left 8 FWLM regiments stranded deep within the Sana commonality at the mercy of the hostile naval vessels overhead. As the Inner Sphere entered December 2787, the first year of the Succession Wars was coming to a close. The brutality on display had shocked all involved. They hoped for a decisive victory. 238 years later, we're still waiting.
Oh my god. That was just the first year of the war. That was just the first year of it. Oh my god. Yeah, this is a good stop point. This is a good stop point. Okay. This is already starting off. Now, when the Black Panther Legion text was talking about how badly the Inner Sphere had degraded in terms of technology, in terms of its capabilities, in terms of everything, I was wondering how in the world it would get to that point. I'm beginning to see it now. We're talking about several incidents just in the first year alone where shipyards were destroyed, industrial capacity was destroyed, worlds were rendered useless, and nobody is doing anything that makes real sense. Nobody's really doing anything that makes any real sense except for the Koreans. The Koreans are the only ones that seem to have a head on their shoulders. The feint against the Steiners. The feint against the Steiners leading to the just absolute beatdown of the Federated Sons. I mean, that is on another different level in terms of just how bad this has gotten, how quickly this got bad. Yeah, your free trial of civilization has expired. There is no civilization anymore. This is just ugly. Okay, this is just ugly. This war lasted 34 years. We only went through the first one, and there were several worlds that were relatively just glassed out of existence. Shipyards were destroyed. Just outright brutality on both sides. And it's only going to get worse. This is just the opening shots. This is only going to get worse. This is only going to get far, far worse. And some of the decisions being made here are just going to get ugly very, very, very fast. The Capellans are doing themselves absolutely no favors, because when House Davian gets its house in order and gets its stuff together to push back against the Caretans, they have pissed off the Davians. So when the Davians hit them back, they're going to be squeezed between the Free Worlds League, which has shown absolutely no problem with beating the brakes off of them, and the Davians, who have more than enough reason to be pissed off at them now. The Federated Sons are in the worst tactical position right now. They are in the absolute worst tactical position right now. They had 3 districts of control, and they literally just lost one of them. Yeah, Sean, no kidding. The Federated Sons are going to be entirely focused on Korea. There's no way they can do anything else other than that now. The attack from Korea oh God, it is ugly. I don't understand yet. Oh God. Ugh. If I was an alien civilization looking at this, I'd just be like, yep, nah, fuck that. I'm not getting involved in any of this. I'm not getting involved in any of this. I'm staying out of this. I don't want to touch this with a barge pole. Warpugs, this is just absolutely nasty. Centaurs is going to be a name. I do not doubt it. Old Kentucky should have lasted longer. Dude, a lot of other places should have lasted longer. Oh. Suffer not the Xenos. Yeah, this is... Hesperus is going to be a repeating name. Dude, there is so much here that is... This is a ugly war. This is an absolutely hideous war, okay? And it's only going to get worse. Okay, so I'm going to take off from here, guys. I'm going to take off. I got some things to get ready to go. I'm going to see if I can't do this again tomorrow. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this again tomorrow. Of course, we have Friday, which is shenanigans. But Saturday, I may be able to do some stuff. Saturday, I may be able to get some stuff done. I may be able to put some stuff up. As far as getting back to this, I really do want to get back to this as soon as possible. But until then, guys, thank you so much for joining me. Oh my God, this has been. We still haven't hit wartime o'clock. Oh God. Oh man, alive! This is absolutely hideous. This is ugly. All right, guys, I'm gonna take off out of here. I hope you guys have a great night. I will catch you guys next time. Thank you, everybody for coming in. Lunatic, much appreciated. Christian, Repressed Memories, Seth, Jen Havoc, Prophet, Alan. Thank you guys so much for the super chats. Like, much appreciated. I'm taking off out of here, and we're gonna see some Warcom soon. I'll catch you guys next time.
I met a little fella by the name of Warpug from the Free World League. Loud and very ugly, living his best pug life. Had him dreaming of being a much warrior pilot, sitting on his grandma's lap and he's fighting composed. The boy was shy away from nothing. That's a jag. Warpug pointed at it. I don't think it's a cat. I think this person might be my dad. That's a battle master. Oh no, excuse me, my hand slipped and destroyed it by accident. Warpug destroyed me again. Warpug destroyed another lance. Like he said he would know, he didn't even apologize. Warpug did it to you. Bushy little Warpug, not like the kindest guy. Unsportsmanlike, shoot your legs and Warpug die. An eye for an eye, a man 5'9" and a hateful rise. Shooting DCK players like they shot Cujo. Little pug dog with a burgundy coat. Warpug destroy me again. Warpug destroy me again. Warpug did it to you. Warpug destroyed another lance. Like he said he would, and then laughed in your face at the beginning. Warpug did it to you, and laughed in your face again. He would, and then laughed in your face at the beginning. Warpug did it to you, and laughed in your face again.